In the heart of Ares stood a kingdom ruled by a monarch often remembered as the Mad King Mars. Surrounded by what could only be described as dangerous lunatics, he remained undefeated throughout his reign, until the very end. His final words were blunt and simple, dismissing the notion of eating something so repulsive, and marking the closing chapter of his story. On that day, an attendant approached silently, bearing a tray of food, yet Mars showed no interest. He claimed he had no appetite and allowed the servant to leave. The man's name was Mars, prince of a small, secluded realm on the distant edge of Ares. Traditionally, such a title would evoke images of indulgence and opulence, delicious feasts and comforts beyond measure. But reality was starkly different. Currently, Mars was gnawing on monster meat, trying to sustain himself amid dire circumstances. He had fled the palace, forced to hunt for his survival in the dark woods. The meat from monsters was his only safe nourishment. It wasn't a lack of supplies within the castle walls that pushed him into the wilderness. Rather, it was the pervasive corruption that gnawed at his homeland. His kingdom thrived with treachery, and the prime minister wielded power like a despotic tyrant behind closed doors. For reasons unknown, Games viewed Mars as a threat to be eliminated and constantly sought ways to assassinate him. Even after cooking the monstrous flesh, its foul taste persisted, harsh, bitter, and unpalatable. Yet, consuming it was an unavoidable act of survival. As he forced down another bite, a quiet thought surfaced. How much longer could he endure this hardship? Just as he hesitated before the next swallow, an unexpected figure appeared behind him, materializing as if from thin air. A girl, mysterious and calm, announced her intention to make him her pupil. Startled, Mars quickly drew his sword, instinctively wary of her sudden emergence, unaware of her presence until that moment. She regarded him with steady eyes, noting that he had much to learn, yet acknowledging his untapped potential. She then declared that he was worthy of inheriting her sword. Confused, Mars questioned what led her to such a conclusion, unable to grasp her reasoning. She offered a gentle smile, explaining simply that her judgment was based on a strange but meaningful belief. To her, his worthiness stemmed from his consumption of monster meat. Mars, puzzled, struggled to understand her logic. She clarified that by eating such flesh, a human could, over time, gradually absorb some of the monster's strength, albeit at a painfully slow rate. She also mentioned that monster meat tasted dreadful and was inherently poisonous. Unsurprisingly, ordinary people would never consider eating it. As she explained, Mars found himself pondering her identity and the reason for her sudden talk about such things. He admitted that during his first few attempts to eat monster meat, he had vomited, but it was still far less dangerous than the meals that had resulted in the killing of the poison tester assigned to taste his food. The girl looked confused upon hearing that the poison tester had been killed. Though this detail technically remained within the kingdom, Mars ended up sharing everything with her. He revealed that he was a prince, describing how his mother had died and how his father, despite being king, had never protected him. Due to the ongoing struggle for the throne, Mars had become a prime target for assassination, and nearly every meal served in the castle was laced with poison. She asked whether Mars had started eating monster meat to escape the poisoned food prepared at court. She also pointed out that the meat itself was poisonous. Mars responded that it wasn't as terrible as it seemed. Once he grew accustomed to it, it wouldn't kill him, although the taste remained repulsive. He sensed that the girl simply ignored his hardships and showed no sympathy, which felt somewhat rude. Yet, oddly, her attitude comforted him in its own way. She then remarked that his ability to adapt was quite remarkable. Following this, she added that if he still feared poison, he still had a long journey ahead. Suddenly, she threw something toward him. Curious, Mars asked what it was. At first glance, it appeared ominous, yet he gratefully accepted it. He pointed out that she was giving something like that to someone she had just met and wondered why she would go so far. He then inquired about her true identity. She introduced herself as Cassandra. Recognizing the name, Mars's eyes widened slightly as a realization dawned. He asked if she was the same Cassandra known as the Red Demon Sword Cassandra. She confirmed that many did call her that, though she didn't particularly like the nickname. The Red Demon, also called the Beast, was feared as a ferocious warrior, famous for slaying dragons and even evil gods. A faint smile appeared on Mars's face as he thought that receiving a ring from someone like her must mean it was a powerful magic artifact. He also thought that if Cassandra truly accepted him as her disciple, he would no longer have to worry about assassination attempts. With that hope, he slipped the ring onto his finger. As soon as he did, Cassandra revealed that the ring was cursed and that it could inflict poison upon its wearer. His mood shifted instantly upon hearing the news. Cassandra explained that this was the initial trial set by a master for her apprentice. She expected him to demonstrate his ability to withstand the poison within the ring. Shortly afterward, a tightness suddenly crept around his neck. Mars began to wonder what was happening as the sensation intensified rapidly, and a fleeting thought of death crossed his mind. Calmly, Cassandra approached him and observed that relying on objects to counteract simple poison was pathetic. Her goal was for him to prove his capacity to conquer the poison himself. She clarified that resistance to poison could be cultivated by defeating it directly. Moreover, she warned that he would be unable to remove the ring unless he overcame its poison or died trying. She noted that an ordinary person would perish swiftly, though someone who consumed monsters' meat regularly might have a better chance at resisting. Immediately, Mars realized that Cassandra was dangerous. That became his first clear impression of her as his master. She had forced him to wear a deadly object while he had been trying to avoid poison all along. The situation felt almost like a cruel joke. Inside the castle, an elderly man examined Mars and declared that the poison was incurable. Even magic designed to heal had no effect. Mars remained in a semi-conscious state for 3 days and nights. All physicians who attempted treatment eventually gave up. The threat grew so severe that rumors spread throughout the castle that Mars had finally succumbed to the poison. Yet somehow he survived. After recovery, those around him congratulated him on overcoming the venom. Strangely, no one found it odd that he had been poisoned in the first place. Mars' father reminded him that safeguarding himself was his own duty. In his thoughts, that was an unusual thing for a parent to say immediately after his son's recovery. He also admitted that this time, the blame was entirely his own. Once he was back on his feet, Mars sampled the food served to him. Though he was certain it contained poison, nothing adverse happened after he ate. He halted, surprised by the change. It seemed as if the poison's effect had altered. Mars realized he no longer felt sick. At that moment, he understood that he had successfully defeated the toxin. He resumed eating normal meals, recognizing the difficulty but also realizing that the resistance he had gained made a significant difference. One night, he ventured into the forest and informed Cassandra, his master, that he had conquered the poison. Cassandra displayed no surprise and made it clear she had already expected this. With that victory, there was no longer any reason to worry about deadly toxins. Mars felt a genuine sense of gratitude toward her. Soon after, Cassandra placed an object on the ground and announced her intention to give it to him. The enchanted bracelets embedded with gravity magic doubled the wearer's weight the moment they were put on. Feeling this sudden increase in burden, Mars started to suspect that Cassandra might actually be trying to kill him, especially since his previous trial had evidently not marked the end of his training. Cassandra then inquired whether he was still consuming monster meat. Mars admitted that he had not done so for nearly a week, explaining that now, free from poison concerns, there was no reason to continue eating it. He wondered if his decision to stop had been a mistake. Without replying directly, Cassandra turned away and told him to wait where he was. When she returned, she carried the carcass of a dead monster and tossed a piece of its raw meat at Mars, instructing him to eat it. The creature was a rare basilisk, and Cassandra explained that if Mars had truly mastered the poison from the ring, he should be able to eat such meat. She pointed out that while the meat was exceptionally fresh, it was still raw. Mars hesitated, asking if it might be possible to cook it first. Cassandra refused, insisting that heat would diminish its potency. Reluctantly, Mars took a bite. The flavor nearly made him vomit, and he briefly thought that this might be what finally caused his end. Cassandra urged him to swallow. After forcing the meat down, he collapsed to his knees, struggling to stay upright. He inquired whether the meat itself was poisonous. Cassandra confirmed it was, explaining that the stronger the monster, the more toxic its flesh was to humans. For instance, she said, dragon meat would be extremely deadly. She believed that basilisk meat was probably the most lethal he could endure at that moment, noting that even a small lick could kill 500 adults. A chilling realization dawned on Mars. Cassandra was utterly insane. Yet, he pushed the thought aside, assuming the trial would end there for the day. However, Cassandra ordered him to finish eating the entire piece of meat. Mars thought the amount was far too much for anyone to consume. Cassandra interpreted his hesitation as overconfidence, questioning whether he believed he was now strong enough and no longer needed to eat monster flesh. She then challenged him to prove his strength by attacking her with his sword. Mars was taken aback that Cassandra didn't even bother to draw her own weapon. He suspected she was looking down on him. Driven by a mix of anger and determination, he charged and attacked with all his might. Cassandra responded simply by kicking him, sending him flying several steps back. Calmly, she approached and pointed out that he was still weak. In her view, he needed to eat more monster meat to grow stronger. Without hesitation, she pressed the raw flesh against his lips, forcing him to continue eating. It was a lengthy process, but eventually Mars devoured all the meat, tears streaming down his face throughout. From that moment, his rigorous training persisted. Each day, he consumed monster flesh and honed his swordsmanship under his master's guidance. Though their lessons took place only once a week, Cassandra closely monitored his progress, instantly noticing whether he was improving swiftly enough. Whenever Mars attempted to skip the monster meat, she forcefully fed it to him. If he showed any sign of neglecting his sword training, Cassandra disciplined him severely. Over time, his focus shifted toward fighting monsters directly while continuing to eat them, but Cassandra believed he should only face weaker opponents alone. She selected monsters he could barely defeat, pushing him to his limits. Out of all foes, Cassandra herself remained the strongest opponent he faced. During their sparring sessions, Cassandra observed consistent progress in Mars's skills. She encouraged him further, even urging him to try killing her someday. Cassandra possessed a unique combat skill. She could hold back just enough to avoid killing Mars in their battles. Her movements were so swift that often Mars's body could not keep pace. After 3 relentless years of training, however, noticeable change emerged. Cassandra saw that Mars was finally beginning to grasp the techniques. He had developed a keen sense of detection, allowing him to sense others' presence and evade attacks. His survival instincts sharpened, driven by the simple aim of avoiding Cassandra's strikes. Looking back, those 3 years of brutal discipline felt like pure torture. Yet, fighting Cassandra or powerful monsters seemed easier compared to confronting the assassins lurking inside the castle. One day, Cassandra granted Mars the opportunity to face a gigantic wyvern descending from the sky. The beast soared high before plunging toward him. In a sudden burst of action, Mars struck and sliced the wyvern into pieces. Cassandra was satisfied, recognizing that he had truly defeated a wyvern. Though not as formidable as a dragon, it was still a dangerous creature. She acknowledged his growth and strength. Cassandra also noticed that Mars had become used to eating monster flesh, which he confirmed he did daily. She remarked that such a path to strength was beneficial, to which Mars agreed. Smiling, Cassandra told him that she had nothing more to teach him. She warned him to keep training diligently, warning that their next encounter would be deadly if she found him neglecting it. With those words, the master who had trained him for 3 years simply left. Only afterward did Mars realize he had never asked where she lived. She likely spent her days traversing the world, always seeking formidable foes to challenge. Because of that, it was probably rare for someone like her to stay in one kingdom for an entire 3 years. Mars also understood that if he ever ceased his training, Cassandra would undoubtedly return to strike him down. He was grateful for the brutal discipline he had endured, which had strengthened him immensely. Yet, He knew he still had to become even more powerful if he hoped to survive. The precarious path he chose to escape the assassins had led him straight into what felt like the depths of hell. At that moment, Mars had no inkling how profoundly his encounter with Cassandra would alter his destiny. Still, if he wished to survive the assassins sent by Gamyaamaras, face deadly monsters, and, above all, prevent his own master from killing him, he had no option but to keep consuming monster meat. A brief pause. If you're finding this engaging, consider helping us reach 1,000 subscribers. Every click grants instant strength. Now back to the story. Some time had passed since Cassandra vanished. During that interval, Mars was ambushed once more by an assassin. He managed to defeat the attacker, marking his 10th elimination within that month. The Count even made Mars wonder if the assassin industry might soon face a shortage of operatives. Nevertheless, gamers persisted in targeting him relentlessly. Gamers had forced Mars' father into a marriage alliance with his own daughter, a move designed to produce an heir. This heir would hold the right to inherit the throne, which meant Mars had to be removed from the line of succession. Interestingly, Cassandra, the Red Demon, had somehow become Mars' mentor. Her brutal methods, however, often felt as if she was trying to kill him herself. Mars vividly remembered her warning. He must keep eating monster meat, and if he ever showed laziness when they met again, she would kill him. Determined to stay alive, Mars knew he had no choice but to grow stronger. Sometimes, he wondered how his life had taken such a dark turn. Nearby, he observed a group of men sparring, one fighting against 4 opponents simultaneously. Watching them, a thought emerged. It had been over 200 years since the last war, and thanks to that long period of peace, practical combat training had almost vanished. The kingdom of Falun was enjoying its most peaceful era. Swordsmanship was often viewed as unnecessary, sometimes even regarded as something only barbarians claimed to care about. Duel fights involving blades were forbidden. Because of this, sword masters who continued to train earnestly were seen as odd or unstable, sometimes even risking imprisonment. Mars approached the men and asked if he could join their practice. One man demanded to know his identity, while another eyed him skeptically, assuming he might be a noble's child. One of the men warned Mars to leave or face death, while another suspected that Mars was merely mocking them, playing for his own amusement. Mars instinctively understood that these men harbored a strong dislike for nobles. Among them, however, one individual seemed to grasp the situation better than the others and allowed Mars to train alongside him. This man cautioned Mars not to complain if he ended up dying. Without delay, the man, named Agma, charged at Mars. In the next instant, Mars easily deflected Agma's attack with a single strike, effortlessly throwing him aside. Mars observed that Agma was still alive, mentally noting that most assassins would have been cut in half by such a blow. Immediately afterward, all of the men attacked him simultaneously. A few moments later, the men found themselves kneeling in a neat line. Mars declared that from that moment onward, they would serve as his training partners every 7 days. He also pointed out that he was stronger than all 5 of them combined. One of the men suddenly shouted in protest. From his perspective, Mars was only following them for entertainment. He bitterly reminded everyone that they struggled daily just to find enough food. Such hardships were beyond Mars's understanding, as nobles habitually enjoyed fine meals each day. The man demanded to know what Mars intended to eat that night. Mars replied that his meal would be red bone meat. The man looked confused, but Agma quickly interjected, explaining that red bone meat was the flesh of a monster. He added that such meat was not something a person like Mars could defeat alone. Another man insisted that Mars was lying. Someone else pointed out that everyone knew monster meat was poisonous. Mars regarded these accusations as ignorance. Suddenly, he sensed something approaching behind them, and a massive, blood-red bear appeared. The men panicked and shouted in fear. Mars silently wondered whether the creature might make a good meal the next day. In an instant, he cut off the monster's head. Agma was stunned by what he had just seen. Mars then demonstrated that he was actually eating the meat and encouraged Agma to try some. Agma hesitated but took a small piece. As Mars warned him to eat only a tiny bite, since consuming too much could be fatal. Carefully, Agma took a bite, but the taste nearly made him vomit, as he was unaccustomed to eating monster flesh. Born the third son of a noble family, Agma had been raised with strict manners that valued etiquette far more than swordsmanship. He disliked these expectations, believing swords existed to make their wielders stronger. Many regarded him as a disgrace to nobility, while others saw him as a fool wasting his potential. To avoid falling into frustration, he concealed his true identity and gathered a group of trusted companions to support him. The organization was called 100, a collective entirely dedicated to the pursuit of strength. In their view, power was the ultimate virtue, shaping their hierarchy entirely through the measure of one's might. The title given to any member was awarded solely to the strongest, asserting their dominance. By that time, the group had grown to more than 20 members, who proudly believed they were the most formidable in the country. Many claimed they surpassed even the kingdom's knights, whom they regarded as mere ornaments. But now, an individual seeking vastly greater power had appeared before them. Mars encouraged Mr. Agma to continue eating monster meat. After the latter finished, Mars explained that blood bear meat was still too potent for him. He suggested that Agma, or anyone else striving to grow stronger, should first get accustomed to lighter monsters like the killer rabbit. As Agma contemplated the situation, it became clear that their boasts might have been false. Their conviction in their strength and resolve, as self-proclaimed seekers of power, suddenly seemed superficial. Recognizing this, Agma bowed to Mars and acknowledged him as someone beyond the strongest, a figure worthy of the title Zero, the one above even the best. He then invited Mars to join their ranks and help train them all. Confused, Mars inquired about the meaning of Zero, but Agma simply assigned him that moniker. He suggested that within the group, Mars should be known as Zeros, to suit the circumstances better, as his true name was not yet to be revealed. Mars concealed his appearance beneath armor he had found in some ancient ruins, preparing for the training ahead. From that day, Mars began working with the members of 100. This allowed him to fight at his full potential and greatly improve his ability to withstand battles against multiple opponents. Yet, no matter how many times Mars defeated them, the members always rose again, continuing their struggles until exhaustion finally defeated them. Not even the assassins sent against him had ever shown such relentless persistence. Although the situation felt strange at times, Mars found himself oddly satisfied with their unyielding determination. Over the course of a year, training persisted and results became evident. The group's progress was remarkable, yet the path they traveled felt increasingly unusual. By then, every member had started eating monster meat, those capable of digesting meat from stronger monsters earning greater praise, while weaker ones were often considered inferior. Despite this, Mars personally believed that a person's worth or greatness should not be measured solely by their ability to consume such meat. As a prince, he had never received recognition of this kind before, which brought him a mixture of feelings. On one hand, he appreciated the acknowledgement, but on the other, he questioned the true meaning of strength and merit in a world where raw power now defined status. At the headquarters of the Black Knights of Fallon, Commander Chrome raised a pressing question. He had heard rumors about a gang that spent its days battling monsters while consuming their flesh. One of the knights confirmed the information was accurate. This group called itself 100, and reportedly some members of the Black Knights had also joined them. The revelation stunned Commander Chrome. Yet, among ordinary civilians, many believed the group was a positive force, since the knights were already preoccupied with the most formidable threats. The fact that they hunted monsters was seen as beneficial. Nevertheless, Commander Chrome remained deeply suspicious. Eating monster meat and drinking its blood suggested the group might be part of a dangerous cult. The possibility became even more alarming if his own subordinates were involved. This was a matter he could not overlook. Deciding to act, he resolved to investigate 100's activities personally. If they threatened stability, he intended for the Black Knights to confront them directly. Meanwhile, inside a forest clearing, one of 100's members was instructing a newcomer on how to hunt monsters. He cautioned the recruits not to overexert themselves. The man with a mohawk hairstyle advised them to consume monster meat slowly and in small portions. Observing covertly, Chrome realized the scene looked very different from his initial assumptions. He couldn't distinguish individual members, and he wondered why the organization allowed nearly anyone to join. Soon, the mohawked man approached Chrome and commented on his swordsmanship. He believed that someone with Chrome's skill could easily compete in hundreds ranking battles. He also emphasized that the group's core rule was consuming monster meat. According to him, even a strong fighter would be deemed lacking if they couldn't stomach it. Handing a piece of monster meat to Chrome, he pressed him to try it. He explained that while the flavor might be unpleasant, perseverance would strengthen the body over time. Chrome hesitated, questioning whether it was truly necessary to eat monster flesh. Yet, realizing he had already come this far, he forced himself to take a bite. The taste nearly made him vomit. The mohawked man burst into laughter, admitting he had the same reaction on his first encounter with it. At that moment, Chrome wondered if the man had recognized his true identity. He suspected he might even be trying to poison him. In Chrome's mind, it was clear that a group willing to consume such things could only be some form of evil cult. He resolved to wait until he had gathered sufficient evidence before acting. Once that point was reached, he planned to confront and personally subdue them all. A year passed, during which Chrome's physique changed markedly. His muscles grew more pronounced, and he felt a surge of strength and vitality. It became clear that monster meat was truly extraordinary, fueling his body with newfound vigor. Within 100, members hunted monsters each night, consuming all the meat they obtained and engaging in fierce battles with one another until exhaustion claimed some. Chrome often reflected on how, in earlier days, he had doubted his own sanity. Yet, the pursuit of strength had become so compelling that it now brought him a kind of exhilaration. His thoughts frequently drifted to Zeros, the leader at the pinnacle of 100, a figure seemingly beyond reach. Zeros wielded legendary techniques, such as the sonic blade and magical barrier, skills once attributed to the hero who founded their land. Remarkably, Zeros openly shared these abilities with those earnest enough to learn, never withholding his knowledge. Chrome realized that Zeros's generosity was rooted in a noble spirit, inspiring admiration. Contemplating this, Chrome almost felt that conquering 100 would be an act of sacrilege. In that place, he believed he had finally uncovered his true purpose for living. Meanwhile, in the castle, Mars moved quietly through the corridors, absorbing rumors circulating about 100. Some described the group dismissively as barbaric, solely devoted to monster hunting, while others saw their role as vital allies against dangerous creatures. Among common folk, opinions varied. Nobility often regarded 100 with suspicion and hostility, whereas ordinary citizens viewed them more favorably. Compared with the constant threat to his own life, Mars felt that spending time with Zeros and his group was far more fulfilling. Later, in the throne room, Mars was asked if he knew about a certain organization called 100. Recently, whispers had spread of a strange and perilous group, plagued by internal disputes and known for consuming monster meat. Some even labeled it a mad cult. Mars dismissed these reports as dubious and wondered where the information originated. The speaker was Gamyamaris, a man who had long harbored a grudge against Mars. He then stated that Mars was destined to become the next king, but added that his record as prince was lacking. Consequently, Gamyamaris proposed a plan. If Mars defeated 100, his claim to the throne would be secure, both within the kingdom and beyond. Mars was renowned for his exceptional swordsmanship, a skill that set him apart from others. From the perspective of the gamers, there was no one better suited than Mars to confront the so-called bandits. Deep in thought, Mars quickly grasped the real intention behind the proposal. 100 had been steadily gaining the support of common folk, and if Mars were to lead the crackdown, that backing could easily dissolve. It became clear to him that Gamimra was plotting this as an act of revenge. Even Mars's own father continued to obey Gamimra's commands, which only complicated matters. Gamers inquired whether Mars was willing to undertake this task. Calmly, he acknowledged the request and accepted it. Stepping out of the throne room and walking down the corridor, Mars contemplated the gravity of the situation. It was obvious that Gamimra was trying to force him into a morally questionable role, one that could jeopardize his reputation. Despite recognizing the trap, Mars was determined not to be manipulated by Gamimra's schemes. Yet, he pondered how he might resolve the dilemma effectively. Nearby, a girl sat silently on a chair, catching his attention. She greeted him as if it had been ages since they last saw each other. Mars immediately wondered who she was and how she had managed to enter the royal hall unnoticed. Her poised presence suggested she had been waiting to ambush him. For a fleeting moment, he even considered that she might be another assassin sent to eliminate him. However, her aura was far more refined and commanding than that of any typical assassin. The girl then offered her power, asking whether he wished to borrow it given his current predicament. She addressed him by the name Zeros. Mars froze, stunned, unable to believe how she could possibly know his true identity as Zeros. Still perplexed, he questioned her knowledge of him. Calmly, she revealed that she had anticipated he might forget and reminded him that she was Fra, his fiancée. It suddenly struck Mars that he did have a fiancée, and he felt a pang of guilt for not recalling her sooner. He then questioned what she meant when she called him Zeros. It was common knowledge that Mars led 100 under the alias Zeros, concealing his royal status. Yet, many years had passed since he last saw Fra, making it seem impossible she could know what had transpired during all that time. Fra confidently explained that she had been watching him all along through a crest, an emblem that granted her the ability to see through his eyes and teleport directly to his location whenever she wished. Mars looked down at the crest on his wrist in disbelief, recalling that during their childhood, Fra had once cast a strange spell on him. At the time, it appeared to be a simple birthmark, harmless and intriguing enough that he had paid it little attention. Now, he understood that she had been observing him constantly through that mark for many years. The realization struck him intensely, revealing that she was far more perilous than he had initially believed. Fra first encountered Prince Mars when she was merely 8 years old. Her father introduced them as prospective fiancés, yet despite Mars's noble attire and royal status, he appeared quite ordinary, just a boy in expensive clothing. At that time, Fra hadn't found him particularly captivating. It was then that she had recently mastered a new spell called the Pact Mark, and lacking a suitable subject to test it on, she chose Mars without hesitation. The spell worked perfectly, leaving Fra satisfied with her success. Several years later, at the age of 11, Mars narrowly escaped death from poisoning. Fra found the poison itself fascinating, prompting her to revisit the Pact Mark after a long hiatus. That moment marked a turning point, for Mars began behaving strangely. One of his most unusual choices was to start consuming monster meat. This unexpected development intrigued Fra even further. She increased her use of the Pact Mark to monitor his actions more closely. Through her observations, she saw that his magical power was steadily growing, a fact that prompted her to imitate him by eating monster meat herself. From that point onward, Fra's fascination with Prince Mars never waned. Mars, meanwhile, recognized the peril of his situation. His private life had been under constant surveillance by Fra, though he chose to ignore this fact for the time being. Instead, he decided to focus on her earlier words about lending him her power, though he remained hesitant to press the matter immediately. Fra, only indicating that they could discuss it later, left him with unanswered questions. Meanwhile, at the base of 100, Chrome and Warren stood amidst a tense atmosphere. It was still incredible to believe that these two commanders of the 4 Knight Orders representing both the Red and Black Knights had allied with 100. Within the Kingdom of Falun, 4 knightly orders maintained order and security. The White Knights protected the king and noble families, while the Blue Knights secured the royal capital. The Red and Black Knights, however, led military expeditions and fought monsters during wartime. Despite their formidable presence, Zeros sensed a heavy, foreboding tension hanging over 100. Agma approached Zeros and urged him to listen carefully. His intelligence indicated that the country was preparing to destroy 100. The agents tasked with this mission were Chrome, commanding the Black Knights, and Warren, leading the Red Knights. Zeros realized how swiftly the information had spread and concluded that the best course of action was for 100 to leave the country altogether. Yet, Warren addressed everyone present, declaring his and Chrome's unwavering support. Both he and the Red and Black Knight orders had resolved to stand by 100 until the very end. Whatever decision Zeros made, they committed to following it faithfully. Zeros was left puzzled about Warren's promise to support them until the very end. Cone then clarified that he no longer believed justice remained within their corrupt homeland. If the Red Knights and the Black Knights united with 100, their combined power would become unstoppable. As long as Zeros continued to lead, Chrome believed they still had a fighting chance to topple the regime. It quickly became clear to Zeros that their companions had no intention of fleeing. Instead, they contemplated betraying their country and igniting a civil war. In truth, Zeros had no desire to involve himself in such perilous conflict. He longed to leave the nation entirely and seek a free life elsewhere. He was confident that once his true identity was revealed, others would understand his stance. With that in mind, he removed his disguise, exposing his real face. The assembled group was stunned. Everyone realized that Zeros, the leader of 100, was actually Prince Mars. A faint smile touched Mars's lips, expecting that now everyone would grasp the full picture. As the Prince of Fallon, he could never justify leading a rebellion against his homeland. Chrome quickly interpreted Zeros' intentions, understanding that Mars was not planning an insurrection but rather a legitimate war. To Chrome, this wouldn't be rebellion at all, but a lawful struggle to establish Mars as the rightful heir. Filled with conviction, Chrome proclaimed that their fight was justified, a battle to crown Mars as the true successor. To him, justice already stood on their side. Meanwhile, Mars silently reflected that, regardless of his noble status, starting a revolt was fundamentally wrong. Suddenly, one of the others voiced admiration, convinced that Mars had been preparing for this moment for years. They believed that Mars's goal in uniting and strengthening 100 was to reach this very point. Mars silently thought that his gathering of followers was never aimed at rebellion. Initially, he had only recruited a handful of allies. Over time, their numbers swelled to over 1,000. Despite still being called 100, Mars understood he needed to calm his supporters and clarify the true situation. He emphasized that even if they managed to assemble such an army, breaching the royal castle was nearly impossible. He questioned whether they truly believed they could defeat the entire kingdom. At that moment, approaching footsteps broke the tense silence, alerting everyone. A newcomer explained that the royal forces were not limited to the White and Blue Knights. They also included the Magic Division. Regarding the Magic Division, Frost stated that they would support Prince Mars. His eyes widened in surprise at her sudden appearance. Chrome chuckled softly, offering Mars a reassuring smile and dismissing any need for him to test their resolve further. He explained that Miss Fra had already laid out everything in detail beforehand. Some members of 100 might not yet be aware, but she was widely recognized as Fra, the Empress of Thunder, a title earned through her formidable magical prowess. As the leading figure of the kingdom's magic core, she was regarded as a vital protector of the realm. Calmly, Fra declared her intention to take charge of the Magic Division, inspiring a wave of excitement among the gathered men who now believed victory was all but certain. Mars, however, felt a surge of confusion. Memories of Fra's earlier words about lending him her strength seemed distant now. He hadn't foreseen their plans escalating to such a bold offensive rather than a retreat. It was difficult for him to believe how swiftly events had spiraled into a potentially rebellious uprising against their homeland. He wondered why Fra was so committed to aiding them, especially given that their alliance had been arranged by their parents. Whether the risk was justified troubled him deeply. Fra clarified that her recent actions had fallen short of what was expected from someone in her position as his fiancé. She intended to fully embrace her role before him and act as a proper partner. Her exceptional magical power, which had earned her the title of Empress of Thunder, had been amplified by following Mars's example. She had begun eating monster meat. Initially, she had shown little interest in Mars himself, but now she couldn't picture abandoning their engagement. The man whose life had often teetered on the brink of death had become a source of profound fascination for her. Fra confided that she wished to continue watching over him, feeling grateful that he was her fiancé. At that moment, One of their allies shouted with enthusiasm, believing their victory was already secured. Their coalition was formidable, including Chrome, leader of the Black Knights, Warren, commander of the Red Knights. For herself, the Empress of Thunder, along with Agma and the entire 100 force, all united under Zeros, who was actually Prince Mars. Together, they seemed poised to purge the corrupt nobility from the land. Mars felt a sense of helplessness in the face of the unstoppable momentum surrounding them. The group appeared ready to overthrow the kingdom itself, and their chances of success seemed high. Yet, a part of him couldn't shake the feeling that they were heading toward a violent conflict. He questioned when and how he had ever developed any desire to seize the throne. Cone declared that their people were willing to sacrifice everything for Mars. In their eyes, he was the rightful heir to the Fallen Kingdom, and they would stand by him no matter what. Surrounded by loyal fighters shouting for justice, Mars felt the weight of their resolve as they prepared for the ultimate confrontation. He recalled the moment he was first ordered to eliminate 100, faced with just two options: flee or rebel. Now, retreat was no longer possible. He had never sought power or the throne. His sole aim had been to survive. For years, he had navigated hardships alone, without allies to rely on. But today, a new reality had emerged. People stood by his side, their trust heavy upon him, making rejection impossible. For watched him intently, recognizing that Mars had become a dangerous threat to the kingdom. Nevertheless, for reasons beyond his comprehension, she found herself unable to divert her gaze from him. Her words echoed her unyielding resolve to support the rebellion, pledging to fight alongside him until victory was achieved. The day finally arrived when 100 would challenge the kingdom's authority. A knight behind Mars noticed the tension in his posture and wondered if nerves crept in, given that this was his first encounter with such danger. The knight reassured him that the actual battle should be entrusted to the commanders of the Black and Red Knights, emphasizing that Mars' pivotal role was solely to face Zeros, leader of 100. Failure to do so would bring tragic consequences. The White Knights consisted mainly of children from noble families, many of whom maintained close ties to the Game Amos. Rather than protecting Mars, they seemed more inclined toward betrayal. Their plan was to bring him into direct confrontation with Zeros, hoping he would falter. Soon, Chrome and Warren approached, asking if Mars was ready to advance. They sought a moment of his time before the charge, but the White Knight commander immediately intervened, insisting they wait. He believed that Mars should not be addressed directly at this point, arguing that the prince had no reason to involve himself with 100's forces. At that moment, the White Knight commander was caught unprepared. The full might of the Black and Red Knights had arrived, raising their banners and weapons in unison. To him, 100's fighters appeared as mere commoners masquerading as knights. Treating them as equals was an insult to the honor of their order. Meanwhile, Mars observed Chrome and Warren's unwavering determination. Seeing their resolve galvanized his own, strengthening his spirit for the coming battle. He then turned to the assembled troops and declared that their true enemies resided within the capital itself. The White Knight commander stared in disbelief, confused by Mars's words, expecting the enemy to be only 100's forces. Before he could speak further, Mars swiftly drew his sword. In a single, decisive motion, he struck the White Knight commander's head, ending the confrontation and signaling the start of the fight ahead. The members of 100 gazed in astonishment, unable to believe what they had just seen unfold. The strike had been executed with extraordinary precision. A clean, flawless cut delivered with refined mastery. Once the deed was done, Mars shifted his attention to another White Knight. He pointed out that regardless of the battle's outcome, these knights had always intended to eliminate him. The knight's face betrayed shock upon realizing Mars had uncovered the truth. But to Mars, the situation was painfully obvious from the start. At that moment, Chrome stepped forward and swiftly decapitated the man, remarking that he was no longer surprised by such results. Another White Knight, terrified, begged for his life, insisting he had not meant to kill Mars. He claimed it was not his decision but a command from the deputy commander. Chrome looked at him with clear disdain. In his eyes, Such cowardice disqualified him from protecting the kingdom. As long as men like that survived, true peace would remain elusive. With that, Chrome executed him without hesitation. Soon after, the remaining White Knights met their end as well. Chrome stated that they had completely fallen from honor and then urged Mars to proceed, confident that it was time to deliver genuine justice to the corrupt realm. Mars silently reflected on Chrome's unwavering loyalty, though his intense gaze was somewhat overwhelming. Warren noted that they were likely under surveillance, a fact Mars had already anticipated. From this point on, swift action was essential. Mars urged his allies to move quickly toward the royal capital. At the city gates, one White Knight announced the prince's arrival and ordered the gates closed. Before the order could be executed, Sir Bled of the Blue Knights struck down the White Knight and commanded the gates to be opened. The Blue Knights affirmed their allegiance to Prince Mars. Recognizing Bled, Mars acknowledged his brave stance. Bled explained that his knights were tasked with maintaining order in the city and had chosen to side with their prince in this moment. As they entered the capital, hundreds forces already clashed fiercely with White Knights. During the fighting, one White Knight identified Agma, mocking him with a taunt that implied he would demonstrate true swordsmanship. Agma responded with contempt, dismissing the claim. To him, that so-called true swordsmanship was laughable. Instead, he declared that 100 would reveal what real mastery meant. As he struck down his opponents, Agma made it clear that the battlefield was no place for showing off. Survival was all that mattered. He reflected on the essence of strength, believing that genuine power lay in utterly crushing one's enemies. Empty words of ideals and nobility offered no real protection on the battlefield. Force alone could not bring an end to violence. One of the White Knights acknowledged the truth in those words, seeing 100 as nothing more than thugs from his perspective. Mars silently reflected that this assessment was painfully accurate. The White Knight then pointed out that they still controlled the Mage Corps, and once the mages joined the fight, the danger would escalate dramatically. Meanwhile, inside the Mage Tower, Fr's father was summoned and briefed on an urgent development. Rumors had reached him that Mars had initiated a rebellion. In response, Fr made a bold request. She asked her father to relinquish his position and transfer the family title into her hands. Her father, stunned, hesitated, seeking confirmation of her intentions. He also noted that he was not yet old enough to retire, and that a woman could not assume the head of the family. As her father questioned her, Fr swiftly prepared a spell. He wondered what her plan was. Suddenly, she unleashed a mighty lightning spell, striking the gathered mages around her. She meticulously described her assault, starting with a shock that stunned survivors, followed by a blast of lightning. Those who endured the lightning faced an explosion, and the survivors of that faced disintegration. The gathered mages begged her to cease, but Fr once again implored her father to cede the family title to her, pleading for this one act of trust. Outside, one member of 100 questioned the unmoving state of the mage forces, suspicious that Fr might have had a hand in their delay. Soon after, gamers appeared, addressing Prince Mars and expressing surprise at the unexpected rebellion. He declared that Mars' path to the throne would now be cut off, announcing that Mars' life was in jeopardy, by his own declaration. Immediately, a group of fighters stepped forward, blocking Mars' path and readying themselves for a confrontation, claiming they had come to end his life. Mars's father called out to him. As Mars looked at his father, a silent thought crossed his mind. The man had never once investigated the mysterious death of Mars's mother. It seemed likely that his father simply didn't care about the outcome of the struggle, as long as his own safety was assured. Suddenly, a mage cast a gravity spell on Mars, yet he remained calm and unshaken. Gamers confidently stated that Mars could no longer move, asserting that his restraints had been secured through magic. Though surprised by the rebellion's sudden outbreak, gamers admitted he had prepared for such a scenario in advance. In preparation for the impending assault, he had enlisted a team of adventurers ranked at the highest level. Soon, reinforcements would arrive and surround Mars completely, marking the beginning of the end. Yet, Mars was still bound by the gravity bracelet Cassandra had given him. Under its weight, he merely moved forward, unshaken. One of the adventurers stared with disbelief, struggling to understand how Mars had evaded capture. It seemed as though the gravity spell was malfunctioning. Calmly, Mars explained that the spell was functioning perfectly. He had simply grown accustomed to such pressure. Out of nowhere, an explosion shattered the silence, erupting overhead. An adventurer quickly identified the attack as the ability of a poison lizard. He warned that Mars was about to become paralyzed. Mars nodded, recognizing the creature himself, and casually mentioned that its meat was terrible, an odd remark that stunned the onlookers. One of the adventurers questioned whether Mars had actually eaten poison lizard meat, knowing it was essentially pure toxin. Without hesitation, another member charged at Mars, convinced the claim was merely a bluff. Mars responded with a single, swift strike. The watching adventurers gasped in horror as he beheaded their comrade, slicing him clean in half. One of them asked the healer if the fallen warrior could still be saved, but the healer replied calmly that only a necromancer might have a chance. Mars quietly apologized, admitting that fighting without the bracelet on had loosened his control over his strength, leading to unintended consequences. Enraged, some of the group immediately threw daggers in his direction. One member ordered Mika to prepare a spell, instructed Lua to support, and told Chad to distract Mars. Mars remained completely unfazed. When another adventurer lunged at him, he unleashed a sonic blade, unleashing overwhelming force. The attacker was cut in half just like the previous victim. A shout for help came from the healer, but she responded that saving someone from such injuries was beyond her power, requiring the strength of a saint. Anger simmered in the remaining adventurers. One of them summoned her power and cast blazing crimson flames toward Mars, declaring that the fire would burn her enemy. Mars remained serene, acknowledging that he could not block such an attack directly. Just as the flames neared him, a magical barrier suddenly materialized, halting the assault. The other members of the group stared in shock. The mage who cast the flames fell to her knees, disbelief etched on her face. That spell had been her strongest attack, yet it had been stopped by a magic barrier, a feat usually only seen in high-level monsters. Mars quietly smirked as he observed their stunned expressions. Felt strangely satisfying to see their surprise. He had perfected this ability after repeatedly facing demon apes. By consuming their flesh time and again, he had honed this skill to perfection. As he moved forward with calm assurance, he gently urged the remaining members to step aside, making it clear he had no intention of harming them. The leader of the group stepped forward to block his path, prompting Mars to suggest they both escape, promising to release him if he simply ran away. The leader responded with anger, mistaking Mars's words for mockery. Pride fueling his resolve, he declared that they would never retreat after losing their comrades. Reminding Mars of his status as an A-rank adventurer, he then swung his sword in attack. Mars swiftly blocked the blow. Their blades met in rapid succession, sparks flying with each clash. During this exchange, Mars discerned that the leader was a remarkably skilled swordsman, capable of keeping pace for a fleeting moment. Then Mars executed a forceful kick, sending the man hurtling into a wall. The leader stared in shock, struggling to accept that he had been defeated by a mere kick. A fleeting thought appeared in his mind. Perhaps Mars was more akin to a monk than a swordsman. Mars reflected that his master had always fought in a similar manner, shaping his own combat style through that influence. Turning his attention to Gamma's, Mars pointed out that he was now the only survivor. For the first time, a flicker of fear appeared in Gamma's eyes. Within, he began to question how everything had fallen apart. He had dedicated his entire life to the kingdom, believing his efforts served its people. 15 years earlier, chaos had engulfed the realm, and the previous queen was responsible for much of the unrest. At that critical moment, Gamma's had convinced the king to overthrow the monarchy in a bid to save the land. Since then, he had worked tirelessly alongside the nobles, gradually improving the realm while secretly monitoring their power. For him, ruling required accepting both its virtues and its flaws, maintaining a delicate balance. Throughout his plans, however, Prince Mars had been a recurring obstacle. Gammas believed certain nobles might exploit Mars as a political puppet. To prevent that, he decided Mars had to be eliminated. Despite Mars's innocence, Gammas had arranged poison, traps, and assassins to ensure his end. Yet, Mars had survived every attempt, enduring despite lacking allies or protection. At that moment, Agma's voice echoed nearby, declaring victory over the noble factions, claiming they had already been defeated. He emphasized that Gammas was now the last remaining enemy. Mars was stunned to hear that all the nobles had fallen. He quickly wondered, if 100 had truly slain them all, then what would shape the future governance of the kingdom? Meanwhile, Gammas questioned whether Prince Mars and Zeros were, in fact, the same person. The weight of the idea pressed heavily on him, indicating that Mars may have been secretly building his own faction all along, preparing for this very moment. Yet, Mars quietly harbored doubts about 100's capacity to truly govern a kingdom. Gradually, he began to consider that perhaps surrendering the throne back to his father might be the wisest course. Turning his attention to his father, Mars broached the delicate topic of leadership. His father reacted with overt fear, immediately claiming that the throne belonged to Mars himself. In response, Mars asked if anyone present truly understood the responsibilities of ruling a kingdom. This question left Games in disbelief. Without hesitation, Mars called Gamimas forward and entrusted him with managing the realm's affairs. His decision surprised Gamimas, yet in the weeks that followed, governance swiftly stabilized more than anyone had anticipated. Soon after, a grand wedding ceremony was held, uniting Mars with his bride, Fra. Fra had gained the trust of many through her courageous stands during the Civil War. However, she soon revealed a darker ambition. She planned to attempt a summoning ritual involving human sacrifices. Hearing this, Mars quietly questioned whether it was truly fitting for her to become queen. Meanwhile, members of 100, including Agma, spent considerable time criticizing Mars for appointing Gamimas. Agma openly expressed his anger, recalling that Gamimas had once tried to assassinate Mars and was responsible for much of the chaos. Chrome also voiced his concerns, questioning whether Mars genuinely intended to leave the kingdom's governance in Gamimas' hands. Mars responded with a simple but pointed argument. If not Gamimas, then who else could manage the kingdom's political affairs? Devoted as they were to strength as the only measure of worthiness, the members of 100 believed only the strongest should lead. Recognizing this flaw, it was evident that none among them were truly suited to rule. Since that decision, Gamimas worked tirelessly. At one point, he declared his loyalty to Mars, recognizing him as a king above all others and vowing to serve him faithfully. After some time, Chrome officially announced the coronation of the new ruler. Mars was crowned King Mars, and the people declared their allegiance, expressing hope that his reign would bring peace and prosperity. The members of 100 also pledged allegiance to Zeros, wherever he might lead. In truth, Mars's only desire had been survival, yet somehow, consuming monster meat had propelled him all the way to the throne. Now, as king, the question remained of how he would begin rebuilding the realm. Beyond that, no one knew what challenges awaited him next. Some time later, Agma approached Lua, the healer, carrying a neatly severed arm and asking her to tend to it. Lua was initially shocked by the gruesome sight. After some time, she succeeded in reattaching the arm, prompting Agma to respond with obvious satisfaction and to praise her confidently. She was regarded by them as their steadfast older sister and acknowledged as a truly formidable A-rank cleric. At that moment, a ranking duel was underway in the arena. The contest pitted Agma, holding the top spot, against Bruno, who was ranked 5th. Both fighters represented the 100 Guild and were competing in the kingdom's official ranking matches. During the fight, Agma, clearly the stronger competitor, severed Bruno's right arm with a single decisive strike, leaving him in a brutal, incapacitated state. Watching from the sidelines, Mars found the scene quite gruesome and wondered how matters had escalated to such violence. Since ascending to the throne, Gamers had thrown himself into his duties with relentless dedication. By seizing noble estates and wealth, he had significantly bolstered the kingdom's finances. Still, Mars had yet to reward the members of 100 for their unwavering support during the rebellion. An idea suddenly sparked in his mind. He decided to build a proper arena. The outdated training grounds were no longer suitable, and providing a new arena as a reward for 100 would surely boost morale. When Mars suggested this, Gamim inquired whether the arena was intended as a public spectacle. Mars confirmed that the concept was along those lines. Gamim then asked if Mars aimed to turn the ranking battles into a national event. Mars wondered if that meant establishing a government-sponsored spectacle with ticket sales. Gamim clarified that this was not exactly what he meant. Mars questioned his response, prompting Gamim to pause thoughtfully. Then, with growing enthusiasm, he declared that the core idea must be gambling. Mars was puzzled by this, as it wasn't his original intention. Nonetheless, Gamim pressed on excitedly. He envisioned allowing people to bet on the ranking matches involving 100, transforming the arena into a national enterprise that could generate substantial revenue. Fallon, being a poor nation lacking a dominant industry, seemed ill-suited for such ventures. Yet to Gamim this plan appeared brilliant. He even believed Mars had foreseen it from the very beginning and had organized 100 with this outcome in mind. Mars merely smiled and let Gamim continue to believe that, if the plan benefited the kingdom, he saw no reason to oppose it. With renewed enthusiasm, Gamim proclaimed that the arena could become one of the country's greatest assets. He immediately set about making arrangements to implement the plan. Within 6 months, the new arena was completed. Thanks to the introduction of betting on ranking matches, the kingdom's revenue more than doubled. Elsewhere, a different scene unfolded. Aaron, a member of 100, hurried in carrying his injured friend. A man lay bleeding from a sword stabbed straight through his chest, the weapon still embedded deeply. Aaron desperately called out to Lua, an A-rank cleric renowned for her healing powers. She carefully assessed the scene and quickly pointed out that the sword remained lodged in the man's body. From her perspective, the man was already beyond saving. His injuries were fatal. She stated unequivocally that saving him was impossible and questioned why Aaron had attacked his own friend if he truly cared. Aaron insisted that Lua was the only healer capable of restoring his friend and that there was still hope to save him. Lua, however, maintained that the situation was hopeless, leaving Aaron overwhelmed with despair. Tears welled up as he admitted he didn't know what he would do if Barry could not be revived. At that moment, Agma arrived and urged Aaron to calm down. Turning to Lua, he insisted that everything would be fine if she simply revived Barry. Raising his voice, he warned that if she refused, no one could predict who might die next. He pressed her further, emphasizing that she understood the stakes. According to him, restoring Barry would resolve the crisis. The surrounding men began crying and pleading with Lua to bring Barry back, their desperation apparent. Moved by their pleas, Lua gathered her strength and offered a prayer. Miraculously, Barry opened his eyes, graying with effort. Relief and admiration erupted among the crowd. Many praised Lua as an extraordinary healer and acknowledged her as a true A-rank cleric. Lua, however, warned them to avoid troubling her again, making it clear that if such a situation arose in the future, she would turn the dead into zombies and send the aggressors to prison without hesitation. The men quickly agreed. Soon after, Mars was summoned to prepare for a special match. Convinced he had little choice, he confirmed his intention to participate. From that moment, Mars continued fulfilling his duties as king. In the arena, fighters like Agma received prize money for their victories. They earned considerable rewards, fought before cheering spectators, and became widely admired. Currently, the rankers of 100 were treated as celebrities, basking in wealth, fame, and prestige. Each day, Mars competed in 10 matches against these top fighters. Agma encouraged him to show his full strength once more and asked him to remove the armlets he had worn during the rebellion. Constant pressure to fight weighed heavily on Mars. At one point, he proposed a system. Anyone who won a ranking match would earn the right to challenge him directly in a special fight. Although the idea initially seemed clever, allowing him to settle challenges quickly and quiet dissatisfaction, it ultimately led to different outcomes. Warren claimed that he had already earned his 5th special match, while Aaron reported he had reached his 7th. Agma proudly stated he had fought in 100 matches without missing a single one. In Mars' eyes, it became increasingly frustrating that he was repeatedly challenged to special matches, with no signs of restraint from his opponents. He longed for them to show some moderation. Soon after, Agma and Warren charged at him with determined expressions, claiming that today would finally be the day they defeated him. Agma remained steadfast in their conviction that surrender was never an option. No matter how often they were knocked down, they would rise again. Watching their relentless persistence, Mars couldn't help but think they resembled zombies, shambling forward with unyielding resolve. They encircled him, shouting his name with enthusiasm, calling him King Mars and Lord Mars. Mars often pondered why he was always the target of these relentless challenges. Despite the fact that most others enjoyed 5 full days of rest, he found himself fighting these matches nearly every day. Sometimes he wondered if Gameras, another figure involved, had once endured a life akin to that of a gladiator slave. Gameras claimed that whenever the king held special matches personally, the crowd swelled considerably, encouraging him to keep scheduling them. No matter how many challengers Mars defeated, they kept returning, driven by an unquenchable desire to confront him again. The endless cycle persisted largely because of the cleric Luda. Initially hired for healing, she inadvertently fueled this cycle by constantly bringing challengers back, creating a relentless parade. Mars often felt tempted to voice his frustrations to Gameras about the situation, but whenever he saw the man working himself into exhaustion, growing thinner while tirelessly managing kingdom affairs, he couldn't bring himself to criticize. With another victory announced for King Mars, the day's ranking matches concluded. Yet, he knew the real ordeal would commence next. Meanwhile, elsewhere, Lua nervously prayed, casting purification magic repeatedly to cleanse her body of poison. She kept invoking cleansing winds, questioning why she was forced to eat poisoned food while constantly using detoxification spells to survive. In a different dining hall, Mars inquired whether the rumors were true, that the killer rabbits had nearly vanished. Gameras confirmed the creatures were almost gone from the kingdom's territory, a fact that struck Mars as surprising. Unlike humans or other beings, monsters were generally thought to always appear in abundance. He mused that perhaps they hadn't fully disappeared but had been driven away. Gameras added that even dragons had lately avoided flying over their lands. The Hundred's members had been fiercely competing to hunt dragons for their prized flesh, with Fra's mage corps joining the hunts through their magic. Hearing that dragons now avoided the area, Mars began to wonder what kind of perilous place his kingdom was becoming. While fewer monsters might seem beneficial, he couldn't shake the feeling that the kingdom might be heading toward danger. Creatures such as killer rabbits had once ravaged crops and threatened local communities. Yet gamers noted that the situation was not entirely beneficial. For those unaccustomed to it, meat from monsters more formidable than rabbits was extremely toxic. Many new recruits joining the Hundred struggled to adapt to this reality. Mars believed the solution was straightforward. If the meat was both poisonous and unappetizing, they could simply cease consuming it. He personally preferred to eat something much more flavorful. If people enjoyed killer rabbit meat so much, it might make sense to breed the creatures themselves. Gamers paused to clarify if Mars truly meant raising monsters, which surprised him. Ignoring conventional wisdom and suggesting such an idea struck Gamimas as extraordinary. Meanwhile, Mars immediately understood the core issue. Gamers was taking the suggestion seriously. If the kingdom started farming monsters for food, other nations would likely think they had lost their senses. Mars clarified that his proposal was not about domesticating monsters for dining, but gamers initially misinterpreted, pondering if it was for display purposes instead. Mars found it confusing how gamers' reasoning had diverged so strangely. He emphasized that it was not meant for entertainment either. Gamers, still pondering, arrived at another possibility. Perhaps breeding monsters was a preliminary step toward integrating them into the kingdom's military forces. Mars' eyes widened in surprise. Gamers' fascination grew as he believed Mars was unveiling a grand strategy. He pointed out that the northern kingdoms already raised dragons and trained dragon riders, implying that similar methods could be used to bolster their armies through monster cultivation. Mars struggled to follow this logic. The idea of breeding monsters for combat seemed utterly absurd to him, almost as if it belonged in the schemes of a demon lord. Yet, gamers enthusiastically continued analyzing the concept, considering the benefits for meat production, spectacle, or military potential. Although challenging, he deemed the plan worth exploring. Mars quickly tried to deny that this was his true intent, but just as he attempted to speak, he realized that he could no longer produce any sound. Confused, he looked behind him and saw Fra standing there. The connection between Mars and Fra, mediated through a contract seal, meant she could have easily overheard their entire conversation before teleporting into his presence. Mars also noticed that she was casting some form of magic, and at that moment, he understood that his voice had ceased because of her interference. Mars then questioned whether Fra genuinely intended to start breeding monsters. She responded quietly, showing only mild interest. Recognizing her stance, Mars immediately understood that preparations must commence without delay. Attempting to halt her efforts would be futile, as once Fra became interested in something, she rarely turned back. Restraining her would only prompt her to act out once her obsession was denied, potentially leading to chaos. The idea of cultivating monsters for military use was now forming in his mind. However, at that moment, Mars didn't grasp the full scope of the consequences. The relentless pursuit of monsters by numerous individuals would inevitably trigger a much larger catastrophe. In Falun, a small, secluded kingdom, plans for mass-producing monsters had begun to take shape. It was somewhat comforting to see Fra pleased with this concept. Still, Mars couldn't shake the doubt that turning monsters into weapons of war might be unnecessary. Falun's modest size and remoteness rendered invasion unlikely, and he wondered if there was any way to evade this dangerous course. Sometimes, he even considered whether someone from 100 could replace him in those high-stakes matches. Nearby, Chrome called out to King Mars, presenting a gravity bracelet he'd acquired. He suggested that wielding it might bring him somewhat closer to Mars's strength. Mars looked puzzled. To him, the bracelet was no more than a prison shackle, originally crafted to prevent prisoners from escaping. It was imbued with heavy gravity magic, and in some lands, criminals received such bracelets as a punishment. The odd part was that these devices were expected to be used by elite soldiers of Mars's own realm. Yet, Mars realized he was hardly in a position to criticize their use. Soon after, Fra gifted Mars another bracelet. She explained that she had made it herself and that empowering it with a gravity of 5 times stronger had been an immense challenge. The idea of 5-fold gravity immediately troubled Mars. Such magic required extraordinary skill. He insisted that the bracelet he already wore with 3 times gravity was sufficient. He feared that 5 times the gravity could severely disrupt everyday life. Nonetheless, Fra regarded him seriously and mentioned the name Cassandra. She pointed out that Mars had been wearing items gifted by Cassandra and possibly other women. This comment visibly unsettled him. Due to the contract sigil linking them, Fra could always observe him. She was almost able to see everything happening to Mars, including his connection to Cassandra, his master. In fact, Fra alone had known about Cassandra's involvement all along. The poison ring and the triple gravity bracelet Mars wore at present were both gifts from Cassandra. Their effects, to be truthful, proved rather disturbing. Mars privately considered that a touch of jealousy from Fra might be somewhat charming. Nonetheless, he sincerely wished she wouldn't attempt to compete in this manner. He proposed that if she intended to give him a gift, something imbued with magical protection would be more appropriate. A potent enchanted artifact capable of safeguarding him would have been ideal. Fra, however, believed that strengthening her husband was a duty of a wife. Mars couldn't help but wonder what kind of woman thought that way. Then, Fra looked directly at him, silently questioning whether he was rejecting her offering. Mars felt a pang of unease, realizing he couldn't easily read her thoughts. Still, he knew she genuinely worked hard on his behalf. When others had suggested ending their engagement, she refused without hesitation. Even during the earlier rebellion, she had risked her life to stand by him. Mars didn't dislike Fra. Despite her sometimes seeming to lack certain human emotions, She remained someone dear to him as his wife. Eventually, Mars accepted her gift and agreed to wear the gravity bracelet she had crafted. He expressed his gratitude. The moment he did, the throne beneath him suddenly shattered under an unbearable weight. Shortly thereafter, in the throne room, a guard approached and announced that a messenger from the kingdom of Cadia had arrived, bearing a message. Cadia, a neighboring nation bordering the Demon Beast Forest, had a much longer history and was considered a higher-ranked country compared to Falun. Both kingdoms faced threats from the Demon Beast Forest, and maintaining diplomatic ties was generally beneficial. Mars began reading the message sent by Cadia's king. At first, he saw it as a possible chance to fulfill his duties as ruler. However, his face soon grew tense. The letter was essentially a complaint. It accused Falun of hunting monsters so aggressively that the natural balance had been severely disrupted. As a result, monsters were now overflowing into Cadia's territory and causing extensive damage. The letter demanded that Falun take responsibility by hunting the monsters within Cadia's borders as well. Additionally, it requested a compensation of 3,000 gold coins. After reflecting on the message, Mars quietly recognized that the situation was indeed dire. If their relentless monster hunts had driven even dragons to avoid their lands, it was only natural that neighboring regions were suffering. The problem was evidently severe. Mars handed the letter to Gamimas for review. On reading it, his aide swiftly understood that the kingdom of Cadia was blaming Falun for the rising number of monsters invading their territory. The accusation stunned him into disbelief. The other gamers reacted passionately, insisting that each nation bore responsibility for controlling its own monsters. Some questioned whether Cadia had lost its pride and sense of duty. The messenger, Lord Odd, responded with quiet certainty that the situation was far more complex. Until recently, Cadia had managed its monsters with relative ease. But in recent years, Falun had begun a relentless campaign of monster hunting, pushing deeper into the Demon Beast Forest at a rapid pace. As a result, fleeing monsters now spilled into Cadia's territory, igniting a crisis they struggled to contain. Mars listened carefully and realized that his own reckless actions had indeed caused serious suffering for Cadia. Warren voiced a defense of their country's approach. He argued that Falun's strategy was always to exhaustively subjugate monsters and develop the Demon Beast Forest for growth. From his perspective, there was no reason for others to condemn them. Agma nodded in agreement, suggesting that if monster numbers threatened Cadia, they should handle it themselves. To him, complaints about the situation seemed pointless and weak. Meanwhile, Aaron reacted more enthusiastically, claiming that with more monsters, they could simply eat them. He even noted that their own country was running short of monsters, implying that their population was possibly overexploited. Mars reflected quietly, aware that not everyone shared Aaron's dismissive attitude. Deep down, he genuinely felt sympathy for Cadia's plight. Meanwhile, Lord Odd studied the scene critically. From a diplomatic standpoint, he understood that the demands he carried were unreasonable. Yet, King Mars's fury complicated matters. As a diplomat, Lord Odd saw little choice but to present the king's demands to Falun, hoping for a swift resolution, and eager to return home. The presence of Mars, however, unsettled him deeply. When Lord Odd cast a glance toward the king, Mars offered a smile that felt oddly disturbing. To Lord Odd, Mars gave the appearance of an ordinary noble. Yet, rumors painted a very different picture. There were tales of a troublemaker prince who nearly lost his birthright. When he sensed he was about to be disinherited, he supposedly adopted the name Mars, gathered outlaws, and instigated a rebellion. Rumors claimed he slaughtered nobles opposing his rule and became a terrifying figure. Some stories even alleged he forced his followers to eat poisonous monster flesh as a loyalty test. After claiming the throne, he reportedly built an arena where his allies fought each other for entertainment. In Lord Odd's view, all of this seemed driven by greed and a thirst for spectacle. To him, King Mars appeared truly mad. Due to his established reputation, Lord Odd believed that Mars would never agree to the unreasonable demands of Cadia. The Game Master responded immediately, declaring that the request was entirely unacceptable and that the issue had already been resolved. Then, King Mars spoke, announcing that Falun would comply with Kadia's plea, a decision that stunned everyone present. Mars reasoned that his kingdom already had numerous people eager to hunt monsters, and the arena generated enormous profits, so fulfilling the request would pose no real challenge. Moreover, maintaining good relations with a neighboring nation was a prudent choice. Chrome expressed concern and urged the king to reconsider, arguing that acceptance might make their kingdom appear weak in the eyes of others. Mars understood Chrome's point. In negotiations, appearing overly soft could invite disrespect. However, he also recognized that Fun's own actions had created the crisis. On a personal note, Mars saw this as a perfect opportunity to send Fra on a journey outside the kingdom. Consequently, he announced that preparations for the expedition would be completed within the next month. During that period, he instructed Chrome, captain of the Black Knights, to assist Kadia in hunting monsters. Chrome acknowledged the order, but soon realized the implications of what he had agreed to. Turning to Lord Odd, Mars asked whether the plan was acceptable and whether Kadia's entry during the monster hunt might cause any issues. Lord Odd promptly assured him it would not, affirming that Kadia had no objections and expressing gratitude for King Mars's generosity. After some time, Chrome approached Mars and asked him to clarify the true reason behind his decision, seeking an explanation everyone could understand clearly. Mars silently reflected that perhaps he had overstepped earlier. Simply stating his desire to visit another country would be inappropriate for a king. Seeking a convincing excuse, Mars suddenly snapped his fingers, an idea emerging in his mind. He declared that a monster stampede might occur soon. The surrounding people reacted with surprise. Observers quickly interpreted this as a warning about a potential risk. A stampede involved a sudden influx of monsters overwhelming an area, often triggered by excessive hunting. Recent monster activity within Kadia had been increasing, and Mars explained that if something further provoked the monsters, a stampede could easily ignite. Such an event would bring severe destruction to Kadia. The people of the realm quickly understood the rationale behind the plan, concluding that the true purpose was likely to preemptively subjugate the monsters. Hearing this interpretation, Mars felt a wave of relief, pleased that his explanation resonated. A potential stampede in Kadia could threaten even Falun, making the expedition resemble an act of national defense. In that context, Mars privately marveled at how convincingly his reasoning had been accepted. Turning to Chrome, the king inquired if he now grasped the logic behind the decision. Chrome nodded, acknowledging his understanding and recognizing the depth of Mars's wisdom. With firm resolve, Chrome asserted that the task of monster suppression should be entrusted entirely to the Black Knights, vowing they would complete the mission without fail. Mars, however, silently worried that their enthusiasm might be excessive, though their motivation remained commendably strong. Exactly 1 month later, the expedition commenced. Mars considered this journey a special one, as it would be his first with Fra, and he looked forward to the experience. By then, the monster suppression efforts should have been completed, and the king of Kadia was likely awaiting their arrival. Yet, Mars soon questioned why the operation had expanded so dramatically. He had initially expected a small diplomatic convoy, mostly officials and scholars traveling together. Instead, what he saw resembled a large-scale military campaign. At that moment, Agma approached with news that they had reached Kadia's capital, Moss. When Mars looked ahead, he was stunned. The city was encircled entirely by monsters. The sight filled him with disbelief. He had assumed the Black Knights had already eradicated them all. Half a month earlier, Chrome had been pondering the remarkable foresight of King Mars. Initially, he struggled to understand why Mars had agreed to Kadia's demands. But as he reflected more deeply, everything gradually fell into place. To Chrome, it seemed clear that Mars must have anticipated the foolishness of Kate Nia's request. In fact, he believed Mars had intentionally continued developing the demon beast forest to provoke such a crisis. From Chrome's perspective, Mars had never genuinely feared a monster stampede, but had rather planned to use it as a strategic leverage. Chrome grew convinced that the entire situation was orchestrated. By deliberately triggering a monster stampede, Mars aimed to create an opportunity to seize control of Cadia. Acting on this suspicion, Chrome dispersed a strange black liquid throughout the forest. Within Falun's territory, scientists had been experimenting with ways to mass-produce monsters, and this liquid was among their latest innovations. When spread over a wide area, it attracted monsters in vast numbers, drawing them like moths to a flame. Chrome believed that once the liquid spread across Cadinia's lands, monsters would converge in overwhelming numbers. Though such an invasion would devastate Cadia, he was convinced that King Mars had already anticipated this scenario. During the chaos, Mars and Lady Fra would arrive just in time to save the towns under attack. Their intervention would not only preserve the villages but also bolster their influence within Cadia, forging a stronger foothold in the realm. Chrome admired what he saw as Mars's flawless strategy, convinced that every move the king made was perfect. To him, this conflict marked the initial step toward Mars's eventual domination of the entire Ares continent. Feeling proud of his king's brilliance, Chrome celebrated his cunning plan. In the present, Agma observed that the Black Knights appeared to have executed their plan flawlessly. Mars, however, was puzzled, unsure of which plan Agma referred to. Agma seemed equally confused by Mars's reaction. The prince pressed for clarification, insisting that the clear answer was simply to aid Cadia. Without hesitation, Mars commanded the immediate extermination of all monsters surrounding the capital. He wondered why monsters were assaulting Moss itself, especially since Chrome and his men were supposed to have already handled them. Regardless of the reason, there was only one course of action: eradicate every last creature. Yet, Mars noted that the number of monsters still seemed far too high, and he couldn't afford to delay his meeting with the Cadian king. Nearby, Lady Fra began an incantation, invoking shadows darker than crimson to return all to emptiness. Black flames erupted from the abyss, casting a terrible glow outward. Mars watched her spell with awe, recognizing its formidable power. He then ordered the Black Knights to focus on wiping out the monsters. Still, he wondered how the situation had escalated to the point that even the capital was under siege. Soon, someone approached and expressed gratitude for Mars's efforts. The man introduced himself as George, the captain of Moss's guard. Mars considered this a fortunate moment and quickly asked George to arrange a meeting with the Cadian king. But he also silently pondered how he would explain this catastrophe to the ruler. George delivered troubling news. The king of Cadia was not present. Mars was surprised. George explained that, upon hearing of the approaching horde, the king had fled Moss with his royal guard. Hearing this, Mars felt a brief sense of relief, thinking he wouldn't have to explain the disaster directly. Perhaps, he hoped, if the monsters were swiftly dealt with, the king might overlook the chaos upon his eventual return. Mars then inquired whether the monster attacks extended to other cities across Cadia, prompting Captain George to confirm that they indeed did. Regrettably, their forces lacked the strength to halt the relentless assaults. Recognizing the grave nature of the crisis, Mars immediately grasped that the damage could escalate beyond control, rendering the promised compensation insufficient. With a steady voice, he stated that he understood the severity and vowed that his troops would take responsibility for the situation. Captain George, visibly confused, argued that the kingdom of Falun should not go to such lengths solely for their sake, emphasizing that Cadia's pride deserved protection. Mars sharply questioned whether they were willing to sacrifice their own people just to preserve their honor. Upon hearing this, Captain George conceded that Mars' perspective had merit. Nearby, Agma approached to report that the monsters outside the castle had already been eradicated, as had most of those that had infiltrated the city. Captain George found it hard to believe. He doubted it was possible to eliminate so many of them so swiftly. Mars acknowledged their bravery, praising their efforts, while secretly appreciating that such individuals could exterminate monsters without hesitation. Soon, the hundreds members began mobilizing to confront the remaining invaders across Cadia, determined to hunt down every last creature and ensure none escaped. Everything driven by loyalty to their king. Earlier, before Mars and his forces reached Moss, the Cadia king had been utterly puzzled by the rapid decline of the situation. Monsters had encircled the entire kingdom, leaving him fearing collapse. Initially, he had planned to formally protest to Falun, demanding they eliminate the monstrous threat. Frustration grew as he questioned the effectiveness of Falun's soldiers, who had claimed they would reduce the monster population. His coachman verified that the Black Knights had supposedly ventured into the demon beast forest to subjugate the threat, yet suspicions darkened his mind. He began to suspect that Falun's forces might have orchestrated this calamity intentionally. An even more disturbing thought crept in. Could it all have been part of a grand scheme devised by Falun from the outset? These suspicions left him deeply unsettled. Suddenly, a scream shattered the tense silence outside. The king hurried out of his carriage to investigate, only to be met with a horrific sight. His men had been slaughtered. The chaos and bloodshed bewildered him, heightening his fears. In that moment, Chrome appeared before him, greeting him politely and introducing himself along with his role. The king was struck with shock upon discovering he was dealing with Black Knights, whom he believed were responsible for defeating monsters. He questioned whether they had truly upheld their sworn promise. Calmly, Chrome assured him that they had not betrayed their word. He explained that the Black Knights had already slain a significant number of monsters, and by the time their forces arrived, the invading creatures had been greatly diminished. Still perplexed, the king demanded to know why his homeland remained under attack. Chrome then clarified one of the key dangers associated with monsters. Their scent of blood often attracted more formidable predators. He warned that half-hearted exterminations only served to draw even more monsters into the area. The king of Cadia dismissed this as nonsense, asserting that he had never seen defeating monsters cause a stampede before. Chrome responded by revealing a different, darker aspect. He produced an alchemical potion crafted by his country's scientists. He explained that this substance had the power to attract monsters, especially when spread widely or combined with monster blood, which amplified its effect dramatically. The potion had been scattered across the territory from the demon beast forest to Moss. The king reacted with disbelief, repeating the information and questioning whether Chrome had truly spread such a lure. It became clear that Chrome had intentionally caused the stampede. He avoided direct confirmation but noted that certain actions had indeed led to chaos. Turning serious, Chrome pointed out that none of this would have happened if the king had not invited foreign knights into his realm. The king was unsettled by this and questioned why Foon had not simply refused the request, avoiding the risk altogether. Chrome explained that every reckless choice made by the king had already been foreseen as part of King Mars's plan. With this, Chrome prepared to conclude his point by hurling the potion directly at the king's face. The king demanded to know what Chrome intended. Chrome clarified that the potion would still work without monster blood. Realizing his peril, the king panicked, offering bribes, land, titles, and anything else to secure Chrome's loyalty and pleading for his life. Chrome, however, responded by stabbing his sword into the king's body. He stated that in their country, no knight would betray their ruler for material gain. Moments later, a horde of monsters descended upon the king's remains, tearing him apart as he tried to escape. 3 days later, the people of Cadia gathered to express their gratitude toward Mars, celebrating the rescue of Moss and affectionately calling him their savior. Mars quietly contemplated the situation with calm detachment. The monsters had been vanquished, and peace had returned to the region without major difficulty, an outcome he found satisfactory. Yet, an obstacle soon emerged. The king of Cadia was dead, leaving no one to voice complaints about recent events, but complicating matters. With the monarch gone, Mars could no longer simply return to Falun. Upon arriving in Moss, Mars had directed the knights escorting him to hunt down remaining monsters, while he personally traveled to towns heavily damaged by the chaos. During these visits, he aided in restoration efforts and distributed gold coins to those affected. Mars was aware that spending such wealth for Cadia's recovery might set a precedent, yet he hoped that his generosity could help avoid future disputes over reparations. Observing the genuine joy of the citizens, he felt confident that his expenditure had been worthwhile. Later, Mars reunited with the Black Knights in Moss. Chrome reported that the fallen king's body had been discovered along the highway, torn apart by monsters in a gruesome state. The official overseeing the exploration reacted with indignation and disbelief. Anger that their ruler had fled during such peril only to be slain, leaving behind a sense of utter failure. The chaos inspired many Cadia residents to declare they could no longer endure living under such circumstances, with some even hinting at pledging allegiance to the kingdom of Falun. Mars was taken aback by this unexpected turn of events. Though the citizens still expressed gratitude for his aid and the gold he had distributed, uncertainties about Cadia's future grew strong. Soon after, Captain George approached King Mars with a request. He explained that Princess Rubis of Cadia wished to meet him, revealing that she had remained inside the castle throughout the crisis and had not fled. George conveyed her message faithfully. The princess was deeply moved by Mars's heroic acts and sincerely wanted to meet him face to face. Mars agreed to the meeting but then added that the encounter should remain strictly confidential, a private dinner attended solely by him. He had no objections, yet hesitated briefly. Though the meeting would be secret from others, he understood that Fr might still learn of it through their bond, as the contract mark linked them secretly. Meanwhile, Princess Rubis quietly pondered her kingdom's uncertain future, questioning what steps would follow after the chaos. The Cadian royal family had almost entirely lost their credibility. Their king had fallen from grace, and in the aftermath, the populace began praising Mars, a ruler from a neighboring kingdom. Rumors quickly circulated about how he distributed gold across disaster-stricken regions. Such acts of generosity naturally won him the admiration of many. It was widely believed that the wealth came from reparations demanded from Falun, initiated by the princess's own father. Princess Rubis contemplated the situation and noticed how everything seemed to fall into place with unsettling perfection. Yet, she couldn't shake the suspicion that the timing was too convenient. Falun had agreed to the reparations far too easily, and from the start that seemed suspicious. She wondered whether King Mars had orchestrated a staged performance, turning Cadinia's demands against them and perhaps even provoking the monster stampede to create chaos, an excuse to invade. To her, Mars appeared as a cold, calculating man. Even if she accused him of manipulating events, she lacked proof. Without evidence, her words would sound like desperate attempts by a fallen royal family. And if evidence did exist, the reputation of King Mars' generosity and strength was already widespread. The people would likely dismiss any suspicion. Mars was known for both tactical intelligence and formidable strength, gradually earning their trust. Despite this, Princess Rubis was convinced she alone saw the truth. Some referred to Mars as the Mad King behind his back, and she found the label fitting. She feared that if King Mars truly gained control over Cadia, disastrous consequences would follow. Perhaps she was the only one aware of that danger now. For her kingdom's sake, she resolved to act. She decided she must be the one to end his life. Meanwhile, within Cadia's castle, a heated voice questioned whether assassination was the answer. Lady Rubis confirmed the plan was to eliminate King Mars. She believed that the monster stampede had been a deliberate act, part of Mars's scheme to seize Cadia for Falun. She explained that the people's loyalty was already shifting toward Mars. Much of southern Cadia had fallen under Falun's influence, and if they wanted to save their homeland, she argued that King Mars had to be defeated. Captain George asked how they could possibly accomplish such a feat in his view. There was no one brave enough within their nation to fight King Mars. When Mars and the 100 Knights entered Moss, they had defeated monsters even the Cadian royal army could not defeat. To Lady Rubis, those men appeared as nothing less than living legends, heroes of impossible deeds. She believed there was one last, desperate option, to poison King Mars. Captain George's face registered shock at the suggestion, as he pointed out that Mars's wife, Lady Fra, was a formidable magician. Her magical senses might detect any poison if she was present. Lady Rubis countered that the poisoning would occur in Mars's solitude, during an intimate meal attended only by himself and herself. She then inquired if George was willing to help execute the plan. Deep down, Lady Rubis understood the gravity of the situation and recognized the need for utmost caution. Any retaliation could devastate Cadia. She carried the weight of this decision alone, prepared to face the consequences, even if it meant risking her life. Later, at the private dinner, Mars's reaction was one of genuine pleasure. He savored the traditional Cadinian court cuisine, expressing gratitude for the warm hospitality. To Lady Rubus's surprise, Mars had arrived unaccompanied, without any guards or protection. She could hardly believe he had come so vulnerably, which stirred a pang of guilt within her. Yet, this unexpected act also worked in her favor. Carefully, she reviewed her plan. Each dish on the table had been laced with poison, designed so that she could respond swiftly, even if Mars proposed exchanging plates. As he ate, the poison would gradually take effect, causing him to collapse in agony, coughing blood as its destructive power manifested. Lady Rubus felt a bead of nervousness forming. She had never executed such a plot before, and the tension made her uneasy. Meanwhile, Mars observed her carefully and noted her evident nervousness. To him, she seemed young, perhaps even a bit endearing in her anxiety. He soon spoke, reminding her that she had summoned him and asking what she hoped to discuss. Lady Rubus explained that her grandfather, Duke Gordon, was a powerful noble ruling in northern Cadia. She subtly hoped to steer their conversation toward politics, knowing Mars's interest would be piqued. Meanwhile, Mars praised the delightful taste of the traditional Cadinian dishes. As he continued to eat, Lady Rubus's nerves grew tighter. She wondered if he had detected the presence of poison in the food. Yet she knew she had to encourage him to keep eating, maintaining her composure. She complimented the culinary skills, suggesting that the dishes were especially well prepared and asked if the flavor suited his palate. Mars responded cheerfully, expressing his approval and enjoying the sharp spices. His satisfaction deepened with each bite, and Lady Rubus watched him carefully. A question lingered in her mind. What sort of man was he truly? Despite the poison present in the meal, he appeared completely at ease, savoring each bite with apparent satisfaction. Quietly, she leaned toward Captain George and whispered her doubts about the situation unfolding before them. George responded in a hushed tone that the food served to King Mars had been deliberately poisoned, as planned. Lady Rubus's mind raced, and she began to see King Mars as almost inhuman. Her own antidote was not perfect, and if she continued consuming poisoned food alongside him, her risk of harm grew ever more serious. While she worried, Mars was contemplating his own thoughts. After the meal, he knew he would have to address the political turmoil in Cadia, and an idea was beginning to form. Turning to Lady Rubus, he asked about her age, and she replied that she was 14. Mars nodded, having expected that. His younger brother was also 14, and upon seeing Rubus for the first time, he instinctively felt they appeared to be similar in age. An idea then took shape in his mind, a simple solution. He could entrust the governance of Cadia to his younger brother, Nickel. Since Nickel and Rubus were the same age, they might work together to manage the situation without complication. His words stirred confusion in Lady Rubus, who wondered if this was a proposal of marriage. She suspected Mars was trying to arrange a political union of some sort. Her suspicion deepened as she realized that if she married Nickel, it could facilitate Falun's annexation of Cadia. The thought horrified her, giving her the unsettling feeling that Mars might already see through their entire scheme, moving exactly as he intended. When Mars inquired about her opinion, he added that Nickel was adept in political affairs and that he believed the two would get along well. Lady Rubus knew she had to respond carefully, maintaining her royal composure. Yet, the poison's effects were already taking hold. Her head felt increasingly light and unfocused. She understood she needed to end the meeting promptly to obtain the antidote. Finally, she indicated that she would consider the idea favorably. Mars appeared pleased with her response. Soon after, Lady Rubus excused herself and left the table. Mars watched her go with a hint of confusion, noticing that the remaining food was untouched. The encounter concluded without any overt conflict. Immediately afterward, King Mars contacted Gamimas in Falun through a magical communication. He announced his intention to appoint Nickel as ruler of Cadia. The news caught Gamimas by surprise, though he acknowledged the order. Reflecting on the implications, Gamimas realized that Mars was likely suggesting Nickel marry the Cadian princess and eventually become king. In his thoughts, Nickel was both Mars's half-brother and his grandson. When Mars first ascended the throne, gamers had believed that Nickel would soon be eliminated. In fact, Nickel had previously been involved in an assassination attempt against Mars. Despite this, the new king chose to spare his life. To gamers, this gesture now seemed calculated, as if Mars had kept Nickel alive not out of mercy but to place him in a strategic position for the future. The realization filled gamers with admiration, perceiving a depth of foresight beyond ordinary understanding. Filled with excitement, gamers praised King Mars, feeling grateful for what they saw as a remarkable matchmaker's touch in arranging Nickel's circumstances. Some time later, Nickel met privately with Mars and expressed his gratitude for being entrusted with such an important task. He vowed not to let his king down. Meanwhile, Mars quietly wondered why Nickel had brought his mother along and felt puzzled by the talk of a promising alliance. Still, he recognized that Nickel at least seemed genuinely motivated. He then directed Nickel to collaborate closely with Lady Rubis and give his best effort. Nickel inquired about the princess's current location, and Mars replied that she was somewhere within the castle, though he had heard she was unwell. Nearby, Chrome asked whether he should accompany Nickel, and Mars deemed that reasonable. From Mars' perspective, allowing Nickel to tour the castle wouldn't cause trouble, especially with Chrome present. Confident in the arrangement, he delegated the task to Chrome, who accepted without hesitation. Soon after, a loud scream echoed through the corridor. Chrome had swiftly subdued several Cadia knights. Calmly, he instructed them not to interfere, questioning why anyone would attempt to block the future king of Cadia. Captain George arrived promptly, urging everyone to hold back. He acknowledged Chrome's service to the Falunian king but argued that such violence was unwarranted. Chrome retorted that Lord Nickel had traveled there with a purpose, to meet his future wife. From his standpoint, there was no reason Captain George couldn't indulge Nickel's wishes just a little. Prince Nickel then stepped forward and explained that the matter had already been settled. He stated that the arrangement was made between his grandfather, Gamiamares, and the princess's grandfather, Duke Gordon. In his account, both elders had been satisfied with the outcome and had even expressed their gratitude to King Mars. Captain George dismissed this claim as absurd, insisting that Duke Gordon would never agree to such an alliance. Nickel responded calmly, asserting that Rubis was destined to become the Queen of Cadia and implying that such an outcome was not necessarily negative. He then hinted that revealing the princess's actions toward his brother might not bode well for George. Frustration shadowed George's face as he demanded clarification. Nickel explained that such political situations were common in many countries. He believed that people had always plotted to assassinate his brother, though he personally dismissed such schemes as foolish. With steady confidence, Nickel expressed his conviction that a true king was impervious to the threats of common enemies. Chrome supported Nickel's stance, urging George to make a decision. From Chrome's perspective, George could either persist in defiance or step aside. In either case, the outcome would be insignificant. Seeing no further options, George ultimately surrendered. At that moment, Lady Rubis stepped out of her chamber, assuring George that the situation was now stabilized. She then invited Nickel into her private quarters for a confidential discussion. Nickel accepted willingly. Inside, Lady Rubis inquired about Falfoon's true intentions toward Cadia. Nickel clarified that their ambitions did not target the country itself. Rather, their goal was to help forge a stronger, better Cadia. Rubis responded by asserting that Cadia had already been a good nation before Falfoon's interference. Nickel found her statement intriguing and wondered whether that was truly the case. In his view, if the country had genuinely been virtuous, its people would not have turned so easily toward King Mars. If the realm had been well governed, there would have been no need for foreign intervention from the outset. Reflecting on what a nation's purpose entailed, Nickel suggested that it existed primarily for its people. Rubis concurred. Nickel then argued that if the well-being of the populace was the ultimate goal, Cadia had even more reason to support Falun. He believed that no ruler cared for his subjects as much as his brother did. Rubis responded with anger, outright rejecting his claim. She reminded Nickel that even children had heard rumors about Falun's Mad King, stories depicting Mars as a harbinger of bloodshed and chaos wherever he went. According to folklore, he had seized power alongside bandits, slaughtered nobles, consumed monstrous foul flesh, and built arenas solely for his entertainment. To her mind, the question was not whether Mars deserved the title of king, but whether he could even be considered a decent person. Nickel admitted that many such accusations could not be entirely dismissed. Nevertheless, he pointed out that his brother had never harmed ordinary civilians. Instead, he had removed negligent nobles and hunted monsters threatening local communities. Because of these actions, Mars had garnered widespread support among the people of Falun and was now earning the trust of Cadia's citizens as well. Nickel explained that after the nobility had been eliminated in Falun, the corrupt intermediaries who siphoned taxes disappeared, leading to increased national revenue and reduced burden on common folk. In his view, no one in their land spoke ill of King Mars anymore. Hearing this, Rubis seemed skeptical. Her mood shifted gradually, the earlier anger melting away into a tranquil serenity. It felt as though the beliefs she once held about Mars and Falun had shattered in an instant. In her mind, everything she had trusted seemed to dissolve. Nickel then gently suggested she visit Falun someday to witness the reality firsthand. Simultaneously, he expressed his appreciation that his future bride was both clever and charming. Sometime later, Nickel and Rubis wedded in a magnificent ceremony, an event that also marked the official integration of Cadia into Falun's domain. Mars was pleased with the improved relations between the kingdoms, yet lingering doubts remained about how their marriage had come to be. Meanwhile, inside a different fortress, King Dorson received a modest plea for assistance in reclaiming Cadia. As he listened, he regarded the royal petitioners with silent disdain, considering them pitiable. To him, if they or their late king had shown even a trace of competence, Falun would never have seized their land so swiftly. His thoughts then turned to the figure known as the Mad King Mars. Since Mars's ascension, Falun had undergone a radical transformation. Once a weak and insignificant realm, it exploited the chaos of a monster stampede as a convenient pretext to annex Cadia almost overnight. While still small, Falun's growing ambitions could no longer be ignored. To Dorson, Mars was merely an arrogant upstart who had become dangerously bold. Publicly, Dorson pretended understanding, stating that he could not condone Falun's aggression. The displaced monarchs expressed their gratitude, but in private, Dorson was orchestrating his own plans. The two royal figures before him would become mere puppets, serving as his eyes and ears within Cadia once it was retaken. His first move was to issue a diplomatic demand for the kingdom's return. If Falun surrendered peacefully, the conflict might end swiftly. However, Dorson doubted that they would yield so easily, expecting instead that the situation would escalate into war. Victory would see him ruling from the shadows, allowing the so-called rightful heirs to take the forefront. What happened afterward to the kingdom mattered little. His main goal was to crush Falun's rising power before it could expand further. Elsewhere, King Mars received unsettling news. A request had arrived demanding the return of Cadia to its former crown prince. Mars questioned whether the letter genuinely came from King Dorson, but agents verified its origin beyond doubt. Simultaneously, a second message arrived, this one from Nickel. The message conveyed a high likelihood of war with Dorson, urging the deployment of Falun's strongest forces. Mars was left stunned by the revelation. He had always perceived Nickel as a calm and scholarly figure. When Mars appointed Cadia under Nickel's authority, he anticipated a peaceful arrangement. In reality, Mars had never genuinely prioritized keeping Cadia. The territory had been troublesome from the start and was never truly part of Falun's domain. Yet, Nickel had married the princess and ascended to kingship, complicating matters further. Mars struggled to grasp how events had spiraled so swiftly, as if the marriage had taken place in just a couple of weeks. Now, Dorson had become their opponent. Meanwhile, the members of the 100 were once again filled with anticipation, welcoming the idea of war with eagerness. Warren advocated for seizing the initiative instead of waiting, calling for an invasion of Dorson. He believed Cadia was likely trembling beneath Dorson's threat and wanted the Red Knights to lead the assault. Hearing this, King Mars felt a wave of confusion. He turned to Gamimas, asking whether he opposed the idea of war. Gamimas responded with admiration, viewing the situation as perfectly aligning with the debut of their monster army. To him, everything seemed to be unfolding exactly as Mars had envisioned. Mars, however, found it hard to comprehend their reasoning. Deep down, he preferred peace over conflict. He proposed caution, emphasizing that reckless action would be futile and that careful planning was essential. Two of his advisors immediately concurred, stating that nothing could be done without proper preparation. Mars silently wondered if they all shared the same understanding of the situation. Outside the castle, Agma welcomed his elite warriors with visible satisfaction. He brought up Dorson's demand to surrender Cadia and questioned whether they could allow such an insult to pass unchallenged. He declared that merely watching Cadia be taken was unacceptable. The warriors responded in unison, vowing to crush Dorson's soldiers and avenge the insult. From the castle window, Mars observed the scene with growing concern. His forces had gathered without consulting him first, and now they portrayed Dorson as the villain. He quietly questioned whether giving speeches on castle grounds without permission could itself be deemed an act of aggression. Agma continued, noting that Dorson's army was formidable, well-trained and fully equipped. He explained that their forces outnumbered theirs 5-1. Some soldiers reacted with surprise, but Agma quickly reinterpreted this, declaring that it meant each soldier had to kill 5 enemies. From his vantage point, the situation appeared simple and clear. Mars looked down and struggled to understand the reasoning behind what he was witnessing. To him, Agma seemed to approach war as if it were just a basic arithmetic problem. Without hesitation, Agma challenged the members of the 100, questioning if any of them believed they could not handle 5 opponents. Claiming to be the strongest among them, he declared himself capable of bringing 50 heads as a gift to King Zeros. The declaration intensified King Mars's growing frustration, as none of it aligned with his hopes or expectations. Still, the other members of the 100 responded with increasing enthusiasm, shouting that they would bring back 10, 20, even 30 heads, all eager to deliver the severed heads of Dorson's army to King Zeros. King Mars silently suppressed the rising fear within, watching the chaotic scene unfold. In his mind, it felt as if the value of life was disintegrating before his eyes. He wondered what he could possibly do with such a mountain of severed heads. Turning to Gamaris, he suggested that perhaps the people themselves did not desire war. Gamaris calmly explained that quite the opposite was true. The populace appeared resolutely supportive of conflict. Elsewhere in Cadia, voices among the common people demanded punishment for Dorson's arrogance. Many believed the 100 should demonstrate their strength, and some even spoke of spreading the reputation of Zeros across the continent. Hearing these sentiments, Mars realized there was no longer any escape from the inevitability of war. During the council convened to discuss the conflict against Dorson, the participants displayed clear enthusiasm for the impending fight. Mars maintained a faint smile, silently acknowledging that avoiding war had become impossible. Finally, he accepted the reality and announced that they would proceed with the military campaign. Later, Mars visited the monster mass production facility. The project was overseen by a mage who worked directly under FRA. Until then, Mars had mostly ignored it, but as war drew nearer, he felt it was essential to see the operation firsthand. A mage approached him and introduced herself as Keely, a researcher working under Lady Fra, specializing in monster studies. Mars inquired about her origins, noting that she came from the mage nation of Keel, and asked why she had come to Falun. Keely explained that while Ku excelled in magic, she believed it harbored a critical flaw. She argued that her homeland refused to acknowledge the true potential of monster research. To her, small sacrifices and collateral damage seemed inevitable parts of progress. However, the authorities in Keel had exiled her over what she described as a minor mistake. Mars listened silently, a faint smile playing on his lips as he drew his own conclusions. It was obvious to him that Keely had likely created some unstable creature that gone berserk, causing several casualties. This realization cast her in a new light, revealing her as a potential liability. Mars turned his gaze toward Fra standing nearby, who simply nodded in acknowledgement. Despite lingering doubts, Mars decided to listen further. He inquired about the current status of the monster project, and Keely responded with vibrant enthusiasm. She explained that everything was progressing smoothly, and creating such beings had always been her dream. In her homeland of Ko, that dream had been forbidden, but in Falun, she was free to pursue it without restrictions. As a result, she had dedicated herself entirely to her work. While listening, Mars privately mused that Keely's vision involved assembling an army of monsters, which seemed a natural reason for her expulsion from her homeland. He also realized he had never explicitly given her free rein, yet in Falun, monsters were already being employed in warfare, food production, and entertainment. This fit the reputation he was beginning to cultivate as the ruler of Falun. Keely then mentioned rumors she'd heard about King Zeros. According to these stories, the monarch had seized the throne with the help of a band of outlaws, crushed all opposition, and now governed ruthlessly and without moral restraint. Hearing this, Mars was genuinely surprised. He hadn't realized his reputation had fallen so far, making him sound almost villainous. In Keely's eyes, however, he had become something of a legend among mages. She even told of tales suggesting that King Mars permitted human experimentation to advance magic, placing magic above all else and earning admiration in certain circles. This reputation had gradually turned Falun into a refuge for gifted mages exiled from other nations for controversial research. Mars pondered quietly that many of these mages had been expelled for unethical experiments, and he wondered why they now gathered in Falun. He also noted that the human experiments were actually conducted by Fra, not him directly. Keely then shared that their progress in monster farming had made significant strides. Even the nearly extinct killer rabbits recovered quickly once protected from the hundred's members. She found it astonishing that monsters were now fleeing at the sight of humans, considering it a remarkable development. When Mars inquired about the monster army, Keely pointed toward its location. As he looked, he was struck by what he saw. 10 colossal creatures standing before him. Keely explained they had been fed monster meat, which rapidly accelerated their growth. Normally predators among monsters attacked each other, but providing them with rare, high-quality meat had enhanced their development. The remains from a recent stampede, along with specially crafted potions that boosted their abilities, had contributed to this extraordinary progress. Mars observed that there were only about 100 of them and wondered if such a small number was enough for war. Keely clarified that these were merely the core units. The trained soldiers had already been released into the demon beast forest, where they roamed freely. The alpha beast expanded its territory daily, and its pack of werewolves reproduced naturally. Keely even described them as unexpectedly gentle and adorable. She added that the alpha continued to serve only Lord Zeros. This revelation left Mars stunned, unable to comprehend why a werewolf would obey him. Keely then reminded him of an incident from roughly a year prior when Mars returned a trembling, scarred werewolf. She asked if he had nearly beaten the creature to death back then. Mars paused, contemplating the possibility that he might have done so. Keely explained that the beast now regarded him as the apex predator. She noted that a simple threat to call Lord Zeros was enough to command immediate obedience. From her perspective, the domestication had proceeded remarkably smoothly. She further revealed that the wolf Mars had brought back was a high-tier alpha. As a result, they now controlled approximately 1,300 werewolves, indicating that their army was well prepared. Mars quietly absorbed this information, yet something still seemed slightly suspicious. Nonetheless, the readiness demonstrated they could face Dorsen's forces. It was to be Falun's first full-scale war under King Falun's rule. The battle was imminent, and truthfully, Mars preferred to stay out of it. To the north in Cadia's Brix Plains, Dorsen's invading army advanced as Falun and Cadian forces moved to meet them. The clash that would later be called the Battle of Bix was about to begin. Above the battlefield, Dorsen's mages unleashing their magic filled the sky. Their spells collided with those of Falun's mages, creating bursts of energy that lit the air. One of Dorsen's mages reported to General Kimbri that Falun's magic seemed stronger than expected, questioning whether they should respond with full force. Kimbri stayed calm and dismissed the concern. He assessed that Falun probably had only about 2,000 soldiers, while Dorsen's army numbered 10,000, a 5-to-1 advantage. Kimbri viewed this strategic disparity with confidence. His troops had been trained for tactics based on overwhelming numbers and were well prepared for this kind of engagement. Still, he remained cautious about Queen Frau Falun, known as the Thunder Empress. A prodigious mage since childhood, she possessed the ability to unleash a single, devastating attack that could alter the entire tide of battle. To counter her power, Dorsen's mage corps held their magical barriers without pause, determined to withstand her might. Their strategy was to drain the Falun mages by forcing them to continuously expend their mana. Once their magical energy was depleted, Dorsen's numerical advantage would secure victory. Yet, King Zeros of Falun was a concern that could not be ignored. He had seized the throne through brute force, and within the realm of Foon, he was said to be unrivaled. During the beast stampede in Cadia, Zero's name spread rapidly across the land. Kimbri believed that the blood of an ancient hero coursed strongly through Zero's veins. A hero blessed by the gods could wield powers beyond ordinary human limits. Still, Dorsen had its own hidden strengths. Nearby, a soldier reported that Falun's magical assault had abruptly ceased. This signaled that it was time to deploy the Dorsen Knights. Instantly, the knights surged forward, engaging Falun's forces head-on. As the combat unfolded, General Kimbri observed that Falun's soldiers displayed remarkable resilience. Even when faced with overwhelming numbers, they did not break. But he had anticipated a certain level of resistance. 2,000 Falun troops now faced half of Dorsen's infantry. This clash kept each side occupied. Meanwhile, Dorsen still maintained 8,000 fresh soldiers ready against Falun's remaining 1,000. No matter how formidable each Falun warrior was individually, Kimbri believed they could not prevail against such a stark disparity in numbers. Ultimately, victory was determined by the size of armies. Kimbri's confidence in victory was already solidified. From his vantage point overlooking the battlefield, Zeros watched the fighting intently. He clearly saw how disciplined Dorsen soldiers were. Their formations were precise, and they continually forced their enemies into unfavorable 2-on-1, or even 3-on-1 confrontations. Agma approached Zeros and reported that the lower-ranking soldiers were nearing their limit against Dorsen's forces. Zeros quietly reflected, appreciating those who held the line, even the lesser members of the Hund, outside the top 10. Many of them had now fought in their first real combat. Had the top-ranked fighters unleashed their full strength immediately, the lower ranks might never have had a chance to prove themselves. Zeros understood that fighting monsters was not the same as battling people. Just as arena duels differed from actual warfare. Since no one could predict when the next conflict would break out, it was better for soldiers to become accustomed to group combat now. As a result, Commander Warren, the Black Knight, Chrome, and even Fra had been instructed to hold back their most powerful attacks. The 2nd Regiment was given this opportunity to endure the brutal engagement. Zeros silently hoped that Dorsen's army would grow weary and retreat, as excessive destruction would only leave lasting scars. Agma then asked if it was time to deploy the highest ranks. Zeros agreed, instructing him to gradually replace the lesser fighters with their more elite comrades. Believing they had seized the upper hand, the Dorsen Knights pressed forward, aiming to push Falun's troops into retreat. Suddenly, a towering figure emerged behind their ranks. The colossal warrior swung his weapon with immense force, scattering the knights and sending them flying through the air. He was Wanfu, a warrior renowned for his extraordinary strength. In combat, Wanfu fought with the power of 100 men. Once a lumberjack celebrated for his raw physical might, he had adopted a straightforward motto: never block an attack, always dodge it. Despite ranking 30th among his peers, his overwhelming strength made him a fearsome opponent. His weapon, called the Blood Rod, had been a gift from King Mars. Forged from a rare, massive tree, Its material was so tough to shape and so heavy that most warriors struggled to wield it. But Wanfu had faced such difficulties before, never letting them slow him down. To the Dorsan Knights, his sudden appearance was shocking, some even questioning whether he was truly human or a monster in disguise. Within their command tent, a Dorsan officer hurriedly reported that their lines were beginning to falter. General Kinbray stared in disbelief. With numbers favoring them 5-1, such a rapid reversal seemed impossible. The easy change in momentum prompted him to consider a dire possibility. Perhaps King Zeros himself had entered the fray. A messenger confirmed that several elite fighters from the enemy team had joined the battle, although the king himself had yet to appear. Still, Falun's forces were overwhelming their squads, rendering their standard tactical formations, made up of 3-man units, useless and causing their soldiers to be crushed. Kinbray concluded that if Zeros had not personally entered the combat, then perhaps high-ranking members of the 100 were leading the attack. He wrestled with the idea of retreating to avoid complete disaster. Yet, he knew a hasty pullback might cause the entire army to collapse under the enemy's pressure. On the other hand, pressing forward could bring about a catastrophic breach in their lines. With no certainty, he weighed his options carefully. At that moment, 2 warriors stepped forward, requesting permission to re-enter the fight. Kinbray recognized them instantly. They were among Dorsan's most formidable reserves, the Knights of the 5 Thrones, Mattis and Dawned, meant to face Zeros himself if necessary. Mattis expressed his readiness to fight. After a brief pause, Kinbray authorized their engagement, instructing them only to stall the enemy long enough for the main force to withdraw safely. Meanwhile, Wanfu reflected on his struggles within Falun's arena, where victory had always eluded him. Now, standing on a real battlefield, he was determined to demonstrate his true strength. Before the arrival of Falun's highest-ranking fighters, Wanfu believed he could crush their opponents and prove himself once and for all. Mattis quickly closed the distance, noticing Wanfu's tremendous size. Without hesitation, Wanfu swung his blood rod with immense force. To his astonishment, Mattis effortlessly dodged the attack. Wanfu demanded to know his opponent's identity, to which Mattis replied that he was one of the 5 Thrones. Recognizing this title as belonging to Dorsan's top 5 warriors, Wanfu found their encounter intriguing. In turn, Wanfu announced his name and identified himself as a member of the 100, vowing to defeat Mattis. Suddenly, blood erupted from Wanfu's head, and he collapsed to the ground. Mattis evaluated the fallen foe, contemplating whether to end the fight then and there. However, his only objective was to stall the enemy's advance. He then ordered the Dorsan Knights to retreat, citing that their mission was complete and the withdrawal had been commanded by General Kinbray. Before departing, Mattis briefly regarded King Zeros and saw the encounter as a draw. Soon afterward, Adma observed Dorsan's army pulling back and asked if they should pursue the retreating forces. King Mars decided against it, directing his men to focus instead on tending the wounded. As he reflected, Mars noted that although Dorsan's forces had suffered notable losses, the blow was not catastrophic. His soldiers had gained valuable combat experience, which they would carry forward. Mars believed the best outcome was concluding the war without fostering deeper animosity. That night, within the encampment, Agma expressed his frustration, feeling he had already pushed his limits by holding back. Chrome dismissed his complaints, asserting that Rail's fighting had barely begun. Agma reacted with anger, unable to accept that stance. He pointed out that Chrome had already drawn his sword during the battle and seemed eager to kill the enemy, making their squad uneasy. Warren proposed that the next day, they fight without restraint. Chrome agreed, explaining that the first day's plan to allow lower ranks to gain experience was now complete. Immediately, Agma declared he would be the first to fight when the new day dawned. Meanwhile, Fer told Mars that her patience was wearing thin, and she planned to unleash her full magic the following day. Inside the Dorsan camp, General Kinbray carefully evaluated the situation, pondering their next move. He had never believed that the 100 could be defeated with a single decisive strike. For that reason, he prepared for multiple scenarios and kept his confidence in check. Still, Despite these precautions, their main force had already sustained significant damage, forcing them to reckon with the reality of ongoing losses. He pondered the true strength of Falun's army, doubt lingering in his mind. Soon, a report arrived, claiming that a supply convoy heading toward their position had been ambushed and completely annihilated. Kinri found it hard to believe. The route passed through territories controlled by Cadinian nobles allied with Dorson, which made him wonder if those nobles might have betrayed them. The courier who delivered the message denied any treachery, asserting that the attackers were not human forces. Survivors recounted that the convoy had been overwhelmed by a vast horde of monsters. Kimri responded with skepticism, demanding proof of the report's accuracy. In southern regions, such a monstrous incursion could be plausible, but in the northern parts of Cadia, such a large-scale monster swarm was unlikely. A troubling suspicion then took shape. Perhaps the incident was connected to Mars of Falun. The ambush had occurred earlier, as the supply unit moved along the road, when Keelay, hidden nearby, summoned a sizable group of monsters and commanded them to remain still until the convoy approached. Once the moment was right, she issued an attack order. The monsters surged forward without delay, descending upon the defenders with ferocity. The knights escorting the supplies were thrown into chaos as the monsters tore into them, eliminating them within moments. From a distance, Keelay observed the slaughter calmly. She mentally noted that she had control over more than 500 monsters, whose coordination was remarkably precise. To her, they were almost like pets she trained. She allowed them to devour everything, encouraging no remnants to remain. Back at Dorson's camp, one of the officials dismissed the report as impossible, convinced that no human could command such a vast number of monsters. General Kimbry, however, insisted that they must consider the worst-case scenario. Reflecting on both the earlier stampede and this latest ambush, he saw a disturbing pattern. The monsters always seemed to act in ways that benefited Falun. With the supply lines broken and their units destroyed, Dorson's operations would be severely hampered. Consequently, Kimry decided that retreat was the most pragmatic course while there was still time to withdraw. He ordered preparations for a full retreat to begin at dawn. Yet, the next morning brought urgent news. Falun's forces were advancing rapidly. A soldier hurriedly informed the general that the enemy was moving forward, led by King Mars himself. Kimry was caught off guard by this development. The messenger added that, despite the destruction of their supply routes, Dorson still held a significant numerical advantage. However, Falun's army advanced relentlessly, with Mars leading the charge. Meanwhile, Mars quietly reflected that he had not anticipated the situation escalating to this level. The night before, Agma had announced that Dorson's forces were already preparing to flee. In his view, this presented an ideal moment to etch King Mars's fearsome reputation into the minds of their enemies, ensuring they would think twice before challenging Falun again. To Agma, it was clear that King Mars needed to take the battlefield into his own hands. The king reflected quietly on their current position. They had approached a point where ending the war seemed possible without fostering deep-seated resentment. That was precisely why he had permitted Ki to strike at the enemy's supply lines, knowing her stealth could tip the balance. Luckily, no one had witnessed her involvement. In his philosophy, conflicts should be resolved with minimal reliance on violence whenever feasible. His ultimate goal was always to avoid unnecessary fighting. Mars declared that he had no intention of leading the charge personally. Warren, however, interpreted this differently. He believed Mars had restrained himself the previous day to allow lower-ranking members of the 100 to gain real combat experience. In Warren's eyes, there was now no need for the king to hold back. Mars quietly realized that Warren had misunderstood his intentions entirely. Chrome added that unlike the comfortable, sheltered monarchs of other nations, King Mars consistently led from the front. To Chrome, that epitomized true kingship. Mars reflected that he saw little reason for a ruler to stand on the front lines himself. In his mind, he wondered when such a practice had ever become an accepted strategy. Despite his doubts, the members of the 100 fervently chanted King Mars's name. In the present, the 100's forces, under King Mars's command, tore through Dorson's army. General Kimbri watched the chaos with growing concern. He could not comprehend why Falun had chosen this precise moment to strike. Even with their supply routes cut off, Dorson retained a significant numerical advantage. Suddenly, a Dorson officer shouted a warning, gazing skyward. The sight above instilled a deep sense of dread. High in the sky appeared the figure known as the Thunder Empress. Fra began intoning a powerful spell, summoning the forces of thunder and lightning. Her voice echoed across the battlefield, and the mage forces of Dorson immediately realized the peril. They hurried to raise their magical barriers and sought cover. Fra pressed on with her chant, invoking countless bolts of lightning as if summoning divine judgment itself. This was her ultimate attack, the magic that earned her the title of Thunder Empress. Moments later, she unleashed her formidable magic. A colossal bolt of lightning struck the Dorson army, followed by a devastating explosion that shook the entire battlefield. One of Dorson's officials noted that Fra had not used such destructive power the day before, clearly conserving her strength. Their magical barriers had held earlier, but sustaining such defenses for an entire day had exhausted their mage core. Now their wards lacked the strength to withstand her assault. At that moment, Kimbri finally grasped King Mars's strategic aim. Mars had patiently awaited the moment when Dorson's defenses would be at their thinnest, enabling him to unleash his elite forces. Without delay, Kinri summoned Mattis and Dante, giving them a clear directive to seize his personal knights and intercept Falun's advance. Their task was simple yet critical: confront Falun directly and eliminate King Mars. Soon afterward, the two warriors faced the reigning king on the battlefield. Introducing themselves, they revealed their identities, while Mars did the same in return. He then declared his intention to personally stand against the warriors representing the 5 thrones, commanding Agma to deal with the remaining enemy forces. Agma accepted the order without hesitation. Mattis, full of confidence, perceived Mars's decision to confront both him and Dante alone as arrogance. Preparing for battle, Mattis launched forward with astonishing speed, his movements almost impossible to track, executing a rapid succession of strikes. Mars swiftly recognized that Mattis was swinging his blade far more times than expected in a single instant. Reacting instinctively, Mars delivered a fierce kick that knocked Mattis back. From this clash, Mars deduced that Mattis was a swordsman who relied heavily on extreme agility. At the same moment, Dante lunged from behind. Mars swiftly blocked the attack and realized that Dante wielded a markedly different style, one based on overwhelming strength rather than speed. To Mars's surprise, Dante demonstrated formidable power despite not having consumed monster flesh. Then, Mars created an invisible shield around himself, making it difficult for his opponents to gauge his defenses. Calmly, he removed the gravity armlet he had been wearing, the burden of 5 times gravity no longer weighing him down. He inquired whether they intended to surrender. Mattis refused, asserting that deflecting Dante's strike with a clever trick did not signify victory for Mars. To him, the fight was still 2 against 1. Mars responded that he would no longer hold back, warning they would perish if they persisted. Reaching into his armor, he took off the gravity armlet bestowed by Fra. Freed from the crushing gravity, his movements suddenly became swifter and more fluid. Frustration flashed across Mattis's face as he questioned whether Mars had been fighting with full strength all along. Nevertheless, he rushed forward once more, determined to press on without surrender. In an instant, Mars struck, delivering a devastating blow that sent blood bursting from Mattis's body, causing him to collapse to the ground, lifeless. Dante attempted to counterattack, but Mars cut him down before he could complete his strike, splitting Dante's body in half in a swift motion. The members of the 100 erupted into cheers for King Mars. Meanwhile, the Knights of Dorson watched the fall of the 5 thrones with disbelief, stunned by the overwhelming display of power. Meanwhile, Warren and Chrome pressed on, breaking through the ranks of Dorson's army. As the battle grew increasingly desperate, General Kimbri ordered his troops to retreat swiftly in all directions, prioritizing survival over continued confrontation. His only goal was to preserve enough soldiers to fight another day. Just as the retreat was underway, an unexpected figure appeared, Agma. With a single, decisive blow, he struck down Kinri before the general could reach safety. When the conflict concluded, the king of Dorson learned of the defeat, and the report described it as devastating. Nearly 3/5 of their forces had been wiped out, rendering the continuation of the war impossible. Facing such ruin, the king resolved to seek peace. At that moment, an unfamiliar girl stepped forward and confronted the monarch directly. She proclaimed that there was no need for negotiations because she would personally eliminate King Mars. She exuded a commanding presence that demanded attention, leaving questions about her true strength hanging in the air.